The scream tore through the corridor before Elena even understood what was happening. She dropped the bucket of water she was carrying, and it rolled across the stone floor, spilling everywhere. Forgotten. Somewhere above her, on the east balcony of the palace, little Lily Ashgrave was shrieking, and beneath that shriek was a low, rattling growl that did not belong to anyone who lived within these walls. Elena ran. She was not supposed to run through the main halls. Servants used the side passages, the narrow ones behind the tapestries, the ones that kept them out of sight of nobles and warriors and the Alpha King himself. But there was no time to think about rules when a child was screaming, and something inside Elena, some old and buried instinct, pushed her forward faster than her legs should have been able to carry her. She burst onto the balcony just as the rogue wolf lunged. It was massive, matted, its eyes wild with the kind of hunger that came from being unclaimed and starving for years, wandering outside any pack's protection until madness took hold. Lily had frozen against the stone railing, 9 years old and too terrified to even cry out anymore, her small hands pressed against her mouth. Elena did not remember deciding to move. One moment she was standing in the doorway, and the next she was between the girl and the wolf, her arms thrown wide, her voice ringing out in a command that did not sound like her own voice at all. Enough. The word carried something heavy behind it, something that made the air itself feel thick and still. The rogue wolf skidded to a stop as though it had slammed into an invisible wall. Its ears flattened. Its growl died in its throat. For one impossible heartbeat, the great beast lowered its head and backed away from her, whining like a pup caught misbehaving. Then the guards arrived, blades drawn, and the moment shattered. 2 warriors drove the rogue wolf back over the balcony wall with practiced speed, and it disappeared into the dark gardens below, yelping as it fled. Elena stood frozen, her heart slamming against her ribs, staring at her own trembling hands as if they belonged to someone else. Lily. The voice cut across the balcony like a blade, and Elena turned to see Alpha King Damien Ashgrave striding toward them, his black cloak snapping behind him, his face carved from stone except for the fear flooding his dark eyes. He swept his little sister into his arms, checking her over frantically, his hands shaking despite his strength. "I am fine," Lily whispered, though her voice wavered. She stopped it. Elena stopped it. Damien, it just listened to her. Damien's gaze lifted slowly to the servant girl standing at the edge of the balcony, soaked from her spilled water bucket, her simple gray dress torn at the sleeve where she must have caught it on the stone railing without even noticing. Her chestnut hair had come loose from its braid, framing a face that was, in that moment, pale with shock. He had seen Elena 100 times before. She was one of dozens of servants who kept his palace running, invisible in the way that people who worked quietly and never complained often became invisible. He could not have told anyone her last name if they had asked. He was not even certain she had one. But he had never seen her like this. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice low, almost disbelieving. "I don't know," Elena answered honestly, her chest still heaving. I needed it to stop." Damien studied her a moment longer, something shifting behind his eyes, something that looked almost like recognition, though he could not have said of what. Then he seemed to catch himself, straightening, tucking Lily protectively against his side. "Get the healer for my sister," he ordered one of the guards. Then, more quietly, to Elena, "You may go." She curtsied, the way she had been taught since she was small, and hurried away before her legs could give out beneath her. It was only once she reached the servants' stairwell, once she was alone in the dim, narrow passage with nothing but cold stone around her, that she allowed herself to shake. Her hands did not stop trembling for a long while. That night, Elena lay on her narrow cot in the servants' quarters, staring up at the low wooden ceiling, replaying the moment over and over, the words she had spoken, the way the rogue wolf had simply obeyed, as though her voice carried more weight than her small frame should have allowed. She had always known she was different, in ways she could never quite explain. She healed faster than the other servants when she was injured. Her senses were sharper than they should have been for someone with no pack bond, no wolf of her own that she had ever been able to shift into. She had been told, for as long as she could remember, that she was simply an orphan, found wandering near the eastern woods, as a small child, with no memory of where she came from, taken in by the palace out of pity, because no one else would claim her. She had never questioned it. There had never been a reason to. Until tonight. Elena finally drifted into a restless sleep, and the dream came to her the way it always did, fragmented and golden and just out of reach. A great hall lit by silver light, a woman's voice, warm and aching with longing, calling her by a name that was not Elena at all. A crown, delicate and shining, dissolving into threads of moonlight before she could ever touch it. She woke before dawn, her heart pounding, the echo of that voice still ringing in her ears. "Daughter," it had whispered, "come home." She sat up in the darkness, pressing a hand to her chest, willing her heartbeat to slow. It was only a dream. It had always only been a dream, recurring every few months since she was a child, and she had long ago decided it meant nothing, that dreams were simply the mind's way of filling in the gaps left by a past she could not remember. But tonight, after what had happened on the balcony, the dream felt different, heavier, as though it were trying to tell her something she had refused to hear for years. She rose before the other servants and went about her morning duties in a daze, scrubbing floors that did not need scrubbing, polishing brass fixtures until her arms ached, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from wandering back to the balcony, to the wolf that had obeyed her, to the dream that would not let her go. By midday, whispers had already begun to spread through the servants' quarters. Someone had seen the whole thing from the garden below. Someone else swore they had felt a strange pulse of power ripple through the palace grounds at the exact moment Elena spoke. The other servants glanced at her differently now, some with curiosity, some with a wariness that stung more than she expected. Before the midday meal, Colin Brooks, the captain of the palace guard, appeared at the laundry room door, his expression unreadable. He was a broad man with a quiet manner, respected by every servant in the palace for his fairness, and Elena's stomach dropped the moment she saw him searching the room for her. "Elena," he said, stepping inside, "the king wishes for a full account of what happened on the balcony last night. Walk with me." She dried her hands on her apron and followed him out into the corridor, her mind racing through everything she might say and everything she should not. They walked in silence for a while, past the kitchens, past the training yards where young warriors sparred under the midday sun, until Colin finally spoke again. "I have served this palace for 15 years, he said. "I have seen trained warriors fail to turn back a rogue wolf without bloodshed. What you did last night should not have been possible for someone without a wolf of her own." "I don't have an explanation," Elena said carefully. "It simply happened." Colin studied her for a long moment, his gaze thoughtful rather than suspicious. "There are old stories," he said slowly, "of bloodlines so old and so powerful that even wolves without a shifted form can command lesser wolves through voice alone. I did not believe such stories were more than legend, until last night." Elena's throat tightened. "What bloodlines?" But Colin only shook his head, glancing over his shoulder, as though the very stones of the palace might be listening. "It is not my place to speak of it further. The king will want his own answers soon enough. Be careful, Elena. Power that surprises even the one who wields it tends to draw attention from people who are not always kind." He left her at the edge of the servants' corridor without another word, and Elena stood there for a long moment, turning his warning over in her mind, before she gathered herself and returned to her work. Old Marta, the palace healer who had looked after Elena since she was a small child with a fever and no family to speak of, found her in the laundry room that afternoon, wringing out linens with more force than the task required. "You look like you have not slept," Marta said gently, setting down her basket of herbs. "I haven't," Elena admitted. "Marta, something happened last night. Something I can't explain." Marta's face, usually so open and warm, went carefully still. "I heard. The whole palace has heard by now. You stopped a rogue with nothing but your voice. I don't know how, I don't know why, and the dream came again after, the one I've told you about before, the golden hall and the woman calling me daughter." Elena set down the linen, her hands finally still. "Marta, please, if you know something about where I came from, I need you to tell me. I think I have waited long enough." Something flickered across the old woman's face, quick and painful, gone before Elena could be certain she had seen it at all. Marta reached out and squeezed her hand. "Not here," she murmured, glancing toward the open doorway. "Not now. There are ears everywhere in this palace, child, and some truths are dangerous the moment they are spoken aloud. Come to my chambers tonight, after the evening bell. I will tell you what I can." Elena's heart clenched, half with relief and half with a fear she could not name. "You do know something." "I know enough to be afraid for you," Marta said quietly. "Now go. Finish your work. Act as though nothing is different, even though I suspect everything is about to be." Elena spent the rest of the day in a fog, her mind racing between the balcony, the dream, and the promise of answers waiting for her that night. She caught herself glancing toward the upper halls more than once, wondering if the Alpha King was thinking about the moment on the balcony too, wondering why his gaze had lingered on her the way it had, sharp and searching, as though he were trying to solve a puzzle he had only just realized existed. She told herself it did not matter. Kings did not concern themselves with servants. Not truly. not beyond a passing curiosity that would fade within days. She had learned long ago not to hope for more than her station allowed. But when evening finally came and she made her way through the servants' passages toward Marta's chambers, she passed beneath the window of the king's private study and paused, just for a moment, when she heard her own name spoken from within. "Elena," Damien was saying, his voice low and troubled, speaking to someone Elena could not see. "There is something about her, Gareth. My wolf would not settle after last night. It has been restless for hours, as though it recognizes something I do not." A second voice answered, calm and steady, belonging to his beta. "Perhaps it is simply the shock of what she did. A servant commanding a rogue wolf into submission is no small thing, Damien. Even your wolf would take notice of that." "It is more than notice," Damien said quietly. "It feels like recognition, and I do not understand why." Elena pressed herself against the cold stone wall, her breath caught in her throat, waiting to hear more, but the voices inside the study fell silent, replaced only by the soft crackle of the fire and the restless pacing of boots against the floor. She realized, with a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty corridor, that she had been holding her breath the entire time she stood there, as though the king himself might sense her presence through the wall. She did not linger to hear more. She hurried on toward Marta's chambers, her pulse hammering, the king's words echoing in her mind long after she had left the window behind. Whatever waited for her tonight, whatever truth Marta had kept hidden for so many years, she had the sudden and unshakable feeling that her quiet, invisible life as a servant was about to end, and there would be no going back to the way things had been before. A fist pounded against Marta's door before Elena could even sit down. Marta froze mid-sentence, her hand still raised as though she had been about to pull something from the wooden chest at the foot of her bed. The pounding came again, sharp and urgent, and Elena's heart lurched into her throat. "Marta, open up, it's Colin." Marta exhaled slowly, though her shoulders did not fully relax as she crossed the small room and opened the door. Colin Brooks stood there, his face tight with concern, his eyes flicking briefly to Elena before settling back on the old healer. "There has been word from the northern border," he said. "Riders came in an hour ago. The Blackthorn pack is moving troops closer to our lands, faster than expected. The king wants every healer on standby tonight, in case there is trouble." "Tonight?" Marta asked, glancing at Elena with an apology written plainly across her face. "Tonight," Colin confirmed. "I am sorry to interrupt whatever this is, but the king's orders are clear." Marta nodded, already reaching for her healer's bag. She turned to Elena, her expression torn between duty and the weight of everything she had almost said. "We will speak soon, I promise you. What I have to tell you will not disappear with one delay. But right now, I must go where I am needed." Elena swallowed her disappointment, nodding quickly. "Go. I understand." She watched Marta hurry out with Colin, the door closing behind them, and stood alone in the small chamber for a long moment, surrounded by the healer's neatly arranged herbs and the low-burning candle on the table. Her eyes drifted to the wooden chest Marta had been reaching toward. Curiosity pulled at her, sharp and insistent, but she forced herself to step back from it. Whatever secrets that chest held were not hers to uncover without permission, no matter how badly she wanted answers. She returned to the servants' quarters instead, her mind restless, sleep impossible. The palace outside her small window had grown unusually active for so late an hour. Torches moved along the outer walls, warriors gathered in the training yard despite the darkness, their voices low and serious. Something was shifting, and Elena could feel it in the air the way she sometimes felt a storm coming long before the clouds arrived. She was not the only one awake. Down the hall she found her friend Margaret sitting by the small fire in the common room, mending a torn shirt with quick, nervous stitches. "You heard then," Margaret said without looking up. "Blackthorn moving on the border. Half the guard has already ridden out to reinforce the northern posts. Are we in danger here, inside the palace?" Elena asked, settling beside her. "The king would never let it come to that," Margaret said, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. "But he has been strange these last 2 days. Ever since the balcony." She glanced sideways at Elena. "They say he asked after you 3 times today, once at breakfast, once during his meeting with the border scouts, and once just an hour ago. To Colin directly." Elena's stomach tightened. "Why would he ask about me?" "I don't know," Margaret admitted. "But servants talk, Elena, and the guards talk more than they think we notice. Something about your eyes flashing silver when you stopped that rogue. Something about his wolf refusing to settle since. People are starting to whisper that you are not simply an orphan the palace took pity on." Elena said nothing, her mind circling back to the dream that had haunted her for years, to the golden hall and the woman's voice calling her daughter, to Marta's unfinished confession. and the strange caution in her old friend's eyes. She wanted to dismiss it all as coincidence, as nothing more than exhaustion and fear playing tricks on everyone's imagination. But some quiet, steady part of her recognized that the pieces were beginning to fit together, in a shape she was not yet ready to see clearly. She excused herself not long after, retreating to her small cot, though sleep did not come easily. When it finally did claim her, the dream returned, more vivid than it had ever been before. She stood again in the golden hall, its towering silver pillars stretching up into a ceiling she could not see the end of, moonlight pouring through windows shaped like crescents. The woman was there too, standing at the far end of the hall, her face still frustratingly blurred, as though Elena's mind refused to let her see it clearly. "You are growing stronger," the woman said, her voice carrying the same aching warmth it always did. "The blood remembers, even when the mind forgets. Soon you will not be able to hide from what you are, and neither will those around you." "Who are you?" Elena asked, the same question she always asked, the same question that never received a proper answer. "You already know," the woman whispered. "You have always known, somewhere beneath the fear. The goddess does not choose her heirs by accident, Elena. She chose your bloodline long before you were born, and she has watched over you every day since the night you were taken from your true home." "Taken?" Elena's breath caught. "By whom?" The woman's form flickered, growing fainter, as though something outside the dream were pulling her away. "There is little time left before the truth finds you, whether you seek it or not. Trust the healer. Trust your own instincts, even when the world tells you they are wrong. And Elena, when the moment comes, do not run from the crown that is yours. Running from it nearly cost you everything once already." The hall dissolved into silver mist, and Elena woke gasping, her hand pressed to her chest, the echo of the word crown ringing through her mind like a struck bell. She did not return to sleep that night. Instead, she rose before dawn and made her way to the palace gardens, needing the cool air and open sky to steady her racing thoughts. She had not expected to find Damien there, standing alone near the fountain, his cloak wrapped tightly against the early chill, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the first traces of pink light were beginning to touch the sky. He heard her approach before she could retreat unnoticed, turning to face her with an expression that was harder to read than usual. "You are awake early," he said. "I could not sleep, my lord," Elena answered, dipping her head respectfully. "I did not mean to intrude." "You are not intruding." He studied her for a long moment, and Elena felt, not for the first time, as though his gaze saw more than she wanted it to. "I have been thinking of the balcony," he admitted finally, "of what you did. My wolf has not settled since, and I confess I do not understand why." Elena's pulse quickened, though she kept her voice steady. "I do not have an explanation for what happened, my lord. I only knew that Lily needed help, and something in me answered." "That is precisely what troubles me," Damien said. "Something in you answered as though it had always been waiting for the chance." He stepped closer, close enough that Elena had to fight the urge to step back. "Who are you, Elena, truly?" The question hung between them, heavier than she expected, and for one long moment she considered telling him everything. The dreams, the strange power in her blood, the fragments Marta had almost revealed before duty called her away. But caution held her tongue, an instinct as old and unexplained as the power itself, warning her that the truth was not yet safe to speak aloud, not even to the king whose wolf seemed so inexplicably drawn to her. "I am only a servant, my lord," she said quietly, "the same as I have always been." Something flickered across his face, disappointment perhaps, or perhaps simple frustration at an answer he clearly did not believe. He did not press her further, though his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than necessary, before he finally spoke again. "The border troubles grow worse," he said instead, changing the subject with obvious effort. "Blackthorn's forces have moved within a day's march of our northern towns. I do not yet know their intentions, but I intend to find out before more lives are placed at risk." "I hope you find peace before it comes to bloodshed, my lord," Elena said, and she meant it, though something in his expression told her he did not share her hope. "Peace has rarely been Blackthorn's language," Damien said grimly. "But I did not come out here to speak of war." He hesitated, an unusual crack in his usual composure. "I came because I could not sleep either, and I find that I think of you far more than a king should think of a servant girl he barely knows." Elena's breath caught at the honesty in his words, unexpected and unguarded in a way that unsettled her more than any threat of war could have. Before she could find a response, a horn sounded from the palace walls, sharp and urgent, cutting through the quiet morning air. Damien's expression hardened instantly, the softness of a moment ago vanishing beneath the weight of his responsibilities. "That is the alarm for approaching riders," he said, already moving toward the palace. "Stay inside today, Elena. Whatever is coming, I do not yet know if it comes in peace. He left her standing alone by the fountain, the horn still echoing across the grounds, and Elena watched him go with a strange, unfamiliar ache tightening in her chest, uncertain whether it was fear for what the horn might mean, or something else entirely that she was not yet ready to name. She did not stay by the fountain long. Curiosity, sharpened by the tension in Damien's voice, pulled her toward the front courtyard, where a crowd of guards had already gathered along the gate. She kept to the shadows near the stable wall, close enough to see but far enough to remain unnoticed, watching as 3 riders approached under a banner she did not recognize, black cloth marked with a silver thorn. "Blackthorn," Margaret whispered, appearing suddenly at her side, having slipped away from her own morning duties to see what the commotion was about. "That is their sigil. What are they doing riding right up to our gates in broad daylight?" The lead rider dismounted first, a tall man with pale eyes and a cold, deliberate way of moving, as though every step had been measured in advance. He addressed the guards with an ease that suggested he expected no resistance, and moments later Damien himself appeared at the top of the entrance steps, his expression carefully neutral in a way Elena had already learned meant he was concealing something far less calm underneath. "Alpha Voss sends his regards," the rider announced, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard, "along with a proposal for peace between our packs. He wishes for an alliance to be sealed, and suggests it be strengthened through marriage, joining his bloodline with yours." A ripple of murmurs spread through the gathered guards. Elena's stomach dropped without understanding fully why, though something in her chest twisted uncomfortably at the word marriage, at the thought of Damien bound to another woman through an alliance built on politics rather than choice. Damien's jaw tightened, though his voice remained level when he answered. "Blackthorn has moved troops to my border, while offering marriage with one hand. Forgive me if I find the gesture difficult to trust." "A defensive measure only, given the unrest along the shared border," the rider replied smoothly. "Alpha Voss wishes only for lasting peace, and believes a joining of bloodlines would secure that peace for generations. He has sent his own daughter as a token of good faith, should you wish to consider the proposal seriously." He gestured behind him, and a young woman dismounted from the third horse, dressed in fine traveling clothes despite the early hour, her expression composed in a way that suggested years of careful training. Elena watched Damien's face carefully, searching for some reaction, some sign of interest or refusal, but his expression gave away nothing at all, and that uncertainty unsettled her more than any outright rejection would have. "I will consider the proposal," Damien said finally, his tone giving nothing away. "In the meantime, your Alpha's daughter is welcome as a guest within my walls, provided Blackthorn's forces withdraw from my border immediately." "That can be arranged," the rider said, bowing slightly, before turning to help the young woman toward the palace steps. Elena slipped back into the shadows before anyone could notice her watching, her thoughts churning with an unease she did not fully understand. She told herself the ache in her chest was simple concern for the kingdom, for the threat of war now apparently softened into a fragile offer of peace. She told herself it had nothing to do with the graceful young woman now being led into the palace, nor with the unreadable expression that had crossed Damien's face when her name, Serafina, was mentioned in passing by one of the guards. But as she made her way back to her duties, weaving through servants already buzzing with news of the unexpected guest, Elena could not shake the feeling that the palace she had always known, quiet and predictable in its rhythms, was about to change in ways far beyond anything a rogue wolf on a balcony could have warned her of. Smoke filled the servants' corridor before anyone even sounded an alarm. Elena woke coughing, her eyes stinging, the acrid smell thick enough to choke on. For a moment she thought a candle had simply been knocked over somewhere down the hall, a careless accident easily solved. Then she heard the shouting, and beneath the shouting, something far more frightening, the low snarl of wolves that did not belong inside the palace walls. She was on her feet in an instant, pulling on her boots without bothering to lace them, grabbing Margaret's arm as her friend stumbled awake beside her. "Something is wrong," Elena said, her voice tight. "We need to move." They burst into the corridor to find chaos. Smoke curled along the ceiling in thick gray ribbons, and further down the hall, near the servants' storage rooms, shadows moved with a speed and violence that did not belong to anything friendly. Elena caught a glimpse of dark fur, of teeth bared in the flickering torchlight, before Margaret yanked her backward with a strangled cry. "Intruders," Margaret gasped. "They are in the servants' wing." Elena's mind raced. The servants' quarters had never been a target for anything before, not in all the years she had lived within these walls. Guards patrolled the noble corridors, the treasury, the king's private chambers, but no one had ever thought to heavily protect the servants, because no one had ever believed the servants held anything worth attacking. That thought alone sent a cold jolt of understanding through her. This was not a random raid. Someone had come here specifically, and Elena's stomach twisted with the sudden, terrible suspicion that she already knew why. "Get everyone out through the kitchen passage," she told Margaret, pushing her friend toward the narrow side door most of the younger servants used to avoid the busy main halls. "Wake the others. Go now." "What about you?" Margaret demanded, refusing to move. "I will be right behind you," Elena promised, though even as she said it, some instinct rooted her feet firmly in place, refusing to let her flee while others remained in danger. Margaret hesitated only a moment longer before disappearing down the passage, pounding on doors as she went, shouting for the others to wake and run. Elena turned back toward the smoke and the snarling shadows, her heart hammering, every rational part of her screaming that she should be running in the opposite direction. She did not run. A young stable boy, barely 12 years old, stumbled out of one of the smoke-filled rooms, coughing violently, disoriented and terrified. Behind him, a shape moved through the haze, low and predatory, closing the distance with terrible speed. Elena did not think. She grabbed the boy by the collar and hauled him backward just as the attacking wolf lunged, its jaws snapping shut on empty air where he had been standing a heartbeat before. The wolf turned its attention to her instead, and for one suspended moment, gold eyes met hers through the smoke, filled with something colder and more calculating than the mindless hunger of the rogue on the balcony. This creature was not lost or starving. It was trained, controlled, sent here with purpose. "Run," Elena told the stable boy, shoving him toward the passage Margaret had disappeared through. He obeyed instantly, sprinting away, and Elena found herself alone in the smoke-filled corridor, facing down a wolf easily 3 times her size, with nothing but her bare hands and whatever strange, unexplained instinct had guided her on the balcony days before. The wolf lunged. Elena's body moved before her mind could catch up, twisting aside with a speed that should have been impossible, her hand catching the beast's throat as it passed, and the same word rose in her chest, unbidden, the same command that had stopped the rogue days earlier. "Stop." The wolf did not obey this time. Whatever had made the rogue submit on the balcony seemed to hold no power over a creature this deliberately controlled, this clearly bound to someone else's command. It snapped at her again, teeth grazing her forearm hard enough to tear fabric and draw a thin line of blood, and Elena bit back a cry of pain as she scrambled backward, putting distance between herself and the beast. Footsteps thundered down the corridor, and Elena had never in her life felt such relief at the sight of anyone as she did seeing Damien burst through the smoke, already shifted halfway into his wolf form, larger and darker and far more powerful than the attacking beast. He collided with the intruding wolf in a snarling tangle of fur and fury, driving it back with brutal efficiency, and within moments the creature yelped and fled through a shattered window at the end of the corridor, disappearing into the night beyond. Damien shifted back, breathing hard, and turned immediately to Elena, his eyes dropping to the shallow wound on her arm with an expression that shifted rapidly from relief to fury. "You are hurt," he said, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. "It is only a scratch," Elena said, though her voice shook more than she wanted it to. "Damien, there were others, servants still inside. We need to make sure everyone got out." "Colin is already sweeping the wing," he said, though his hands hovered near her injured arm, as though he wanted to examine it himself, and could not quite decide if he had the right to. "Elena, why were you still here? Why did you not run with the others?" "There was a boy," she said. "I could not leave him." Something in Damien's expression cracked open at that, something raw and unguarded that Elena had never seen from him before. "You could have been killed. So could he," Elena said simply. Guards began flooding into the corridor then, along with Colin, whose face was grim as he delivered his report. 3 intruders confirmed, my lord. 2 driven off, 1 killed near the western gate. All servants accounted for, though several suffered smoke exposure. No fatalities among our people, thank the goddess. "Who sent them?" Damien demanded. "We do not yet know for certain," Colin said, "but the timing troubles me greatly. This attack came only hours after Blackthorn's envoy arrived under a banner of peace." He paused, his eyes flicking briefly toward Elena before returning to the king. "There is something else, my lord. One of the fleeing wolves was heard, before it escaped, snarling a single word in the old tongue. Silvermoon." The word landed in the smoke-filled corridor like a stone dropped into still water, and Elena felt every hair on her arms rise, though she could not have said why the word alone struck her with such force, only that something deep within her recognized it, ancient and aching, like a name half remembered from a dream she had never fully understood. Damien's gaze snapped to her immediately, sharp and searching. Does that word mean anything to you? Elena opened her mouth to deny it, the old habit of caution rising automatically to protect her. But the lie would not come. Not after everything that had happened tonight, not with her arm still bleeding from a fight she should never have survived, not with the ancient word still echoing strangely inside her chest, as though it belonged to her more than anyone else in this corridor. I don't know, she admitted quietly, but it feels like it should. Colin and Damien exchanged a long look, heavy with unspoken understanding, before Damien finally turned back to Elena, his expression unreadable once more, though something in his eyes had shifted permanently, some final wall of doubt finally beginning to crumble. Come with me, he said. It is time we found real answers, before someone else pays the price for our ignorance. On. He led her not toward the healer's chambers as she expected, but toward the palace archives, deep beneath the main halls, where centuries of records and old maps and forgotten histories were kept locked away from casual eyes. Colin followed close behind, along with 2 trusted guards, and Elena found herself walking through corridors she had never once been permitted to enter in all her years of service. The archive room smelled of dust and old parchment, lit by a handful of flickering torches that cast long shadows across towering shelves. Damien moved with clear familiarity through the maze of records, pulling free an ancient leather-bound book whose cover had long since faded, before setting it carefully on a wide reading table. Silvermoon, he said, opening the book to a page marked with a delicate, tarnished silver ribbon. A kingdom that fell nearly 17 years ago, wiped out in a single night by forces that were never fully identified. Its royal bloodline was believed entirely destroyed, save for rumors, never confirmed, that a single child survived the massacre and was smuggled away before the slaughter reached the nursery. Elena's breath caught painfully in her throat as she stared down at the faded illustration on the page before her, a crest depicting a crescent moon wreathed in silver flame, so similar to the strange mark she had always kept hidden beneath the collar of her dress that her hands began to tremble uncontrollably. Elena, Damien said quietly, watching her reaction with an intensity that made her feel entirely exposed. I need you to show me your shoulder. She hesitated only a moment before her fingers rose to the collar of her torn, smoke-stained dress, pulling it aside with trembling hands to reveal the pale crescent mark she had hidden her entire life. The mark she had always been told was simply a birthmark, nothing more than an odd quirk of her skin. The silence that followed stretched long and heavy, broken only by the distant crackle of torchlight, as every person in that room stared at the mark that matched the ancient crest before them with impossible precision, and Elena finally understood, with a certainty that settled deep into her bones, that the life she had always known as a nameless servant girl was about to end forever. Colin was the first to break the silence, his voice hushed with something close to awe. My lord, if this mark is genuine, then the child who survived the fall of Silvermoon did not simply vanish. She has been standing in your own palace for years, scrubbing your floors and serving your meals, and none of us ever thought to look closely enough to see it. It cannot be a coincidence, Damien murmured, his gaze still fixed on Elena's shoulder before he seemed to catch himself, looking quickly away out of some instinct toward propriety even now. The rogue on the balcony obeying her voice, my wolf refusing to settle in her presence. Tonight's attackers snarling the name of a fallen kingdom while trying to burn down the very wing where she sleeps. He shook his head slowly. Someone else already suspects the truth, Elena. That is the only explanation for why they would risk an attack on my palace at all. Who would want me dead? Elena asked quietly. For being the daughter of a kingdom I do not even remember. Whoever destroyed Silvermoon in the first place, Damien said grimly, closing the old book with careful hands. If a single heir survived that night, then somewhere among the living there are people who have spent 17 years believing their crime was complete. Discovering they were wrong would be reason enough for anyone to send wolves through my walls. Elena's mind reeled, memories she did not fully understand tugging at the edges of her thoughts, fragments of the recurring dream now taking on a weight and meaning she had never allowed herself to consider before. The golden hall, the woman calling her daughter, the crown dissolving into moonlight just before she could ever reach it. There is a healer, she said suddenly, looking up at Damien. Marta. She has cared for me since I was a child, and she has been trying to tell me something for days now. Something she said was too dangerous to speak of carelessly. I think she already knows the truth. I think she has known for years. Damien's expression sharpened immediately. Then we will speak with her tonight, before anyone else has the chance to silence what she knows. He turned to Colin. Double the guard on the healer's chambers immediately, and see that no one outside this room learns what we have discovered here until I say otherwise. If word spreads that the heir of Silvermoon may still be alive, We will have far more than 3 rogue wolves to contend with. Colin nodded sharply and hurried from the archive room to carry out the order, leaving Damien and Elena alone amid the towering shelves of ancient records. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of everything they had just uncovered settling heavily between them. "I am sorry," Damien said finally, his voice quieter than Elena had ever heard it. "For every day you spent in this palace treated as nothing more than a servant, when you may in truth be the rightful ruler of an entire kingdom. I did not know what I was missing," Elena said softly. "How can I mourn a crown I never remembered wearing?" "Perhaps not," Damien said, "but you have spent your whole life being told you were less than you are. That is its own kind of wound, whether or not you recognized it as one." He hesitated, then reached out, carefully, and gently adjusted the torn collar of her dress back into place, covering the mark once more, his fingers lingering a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back, seeming almost startled by his own actions. A sudden knock at the archive door made them both turn sharply, tension flooding back into the room in an instant. One of Colin's guards leaned inside, his expression uneasy. "My lord, forgive the interruption. Alpha Voss's daughter is asking to see you. She says it cannot wait until morning." Damien's jaw tightened, his gaze flicking briefly back to Elena before he straightened, composing himself into the careful mask of a king once more. "Tell her I will come shortly." He turned back to Elena as the guard withdrew. "Stay close to Colin's men tonight. Do not wander the palace alone until we understand exactly who sent those wolves, and why." Elena nodded, though her mind was still spinning with everything she had learned, the ancient crest, the fallen kingdom, the mark she had hidden her entire life without ever understanding its true meaning. As Damien turned to leave, already bracing himself for whatever conversation awaited him with the Blackthorn envoy's daughter, Elena could not shake the unsettling feeling that tonight's revelations, as overwhelming as they were only the very beginning of a truth far larger and far more dangerous than either of them yet understood. Marta's hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the candle. Elena caught the old woman's wrist gently, steadying the flame before it could tip and scatter hot wax across the small table between them. 2 guards stood outside the door now, posted there on Damien's orders, and the added protection seemed to unsettle Marta rather than comfort her. "They know," Marta whispered, her eyes wide with something between relief and terror. "After all these years, they finally know." "I saw the crest in the archives," Elena said quietly. "It matches the mark on my shoulder exactly. Marta, please, no more waiting. Tell me everything." Marta set down the candle with great care, as though the small act of steadying her hands might also steady the years of fear she had carried in silence. She reached for the wooden chest at the foot of her bed, the same one Elena had noticed days before, and lifted its heavy lid to reveal a bundle of cloth wrapped carefully around something small. 17 years ago, Marta began, her voice low and unsteady. "I served as a healer in the royal household of Silvermoon, a small but proud kingdom nestled between the mountains to the east. Your mother, Queen Isolde, was kind in a way few rulers are, beloved by every servant who worked within her walls, myself included." Elena's breath caught at the name, some deep and buried part of her recognizing it the way one recognizes a song heard only once in childhood, familiar despite having no clear memory of it at all. "There were whispers of betrayal in the months before the fall," Marta continued. "Rumors that someone close to the crown had grown envious of Silvermoon's prosperity, that outside forces had been quietly courted with promises of wealth and power, in exchange for the kingdom's destruction. Queen Isolde dismissed the rumors as paranoia, though I always believed she sensed the danger more than she admitted, even to herself." "What happened?" Elena asked, though some part of her already dreaded the answer. "They came at night," Marta said, her voice dropping further, thick with old grief. "Wolves loyal to no pack we could identify, moving with terrible coordination through the palace. The king fell defending the throne room. The queen gathered every guard she could to hold the corridors, buying time for the household to flee, though few of us managed it in the end." Marta's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You were not yet 2 years old. Queen Isolde placed you in my arms herself, in the final moments before the attackers reached the nursery, and made me promise to carry you far from Silvermoon, to hide you somewhere no one would think to look, until you were old enough to reclaim what was yours." Elena's hands trembled in her lap, the weight of the story settling over her like a physical thing, pressing the air from her lungs. "And you brought me here. I brought you as far as I could manage, carrying a frightened toddler through mountain passes in the dead of winter, with nothing but the clothes on our backs and whatever coin I had saved over years of service," Marta said. "I told this palace you were an orphan found wandering near the eastern woods, and no one questioned it, because no one had reason to look closer. I raised you quietly, cared for you as best I could from the shadows of my position, and prayed every single day that whoever destroyed Silvermoon would never learn that the crown princess had survived. Why did you never tell me? Elena asked, her voice cracking. All these years, Marta, I thought I had no family at all. Because the moment you knew the truth, you would carry it in your eyes, in the way you carried yourself, in every small choice that might give you away to someone watching closely enough, Marta said gently. I wanted you to grow up safe, even if it meant growing up believing you had lost everything, rather than risk you being hunted before you were old enough to protect yourself. I am so sorry, Elena. I have carried this secret so long I sometimes forgot how heavy it truly was, until tonight, when the weight of it very nearly cost lives in this very palace. Elena reached for the bundle of cloth Marta had lifted from the chest, unwrapping it with careful, trembling fingers to reveal a small, delicate circlet of silver, tarnished with age but unmistakably fine in its craftsmanship, set with a single pale stone that seemed to catch the candlelight and hold it, glowing faintly from within. Queen Isolda's own circlet, Marta explained softly. Not the full crown of Silvermoon, which was lost the night of the attack, but a piece she wore often, one small enough for me to carry, hidden in my belongings during our escape. I always intended to give it to you when the time was right. I suppose that time has finally arrived, whether either of us feels ready for it or not. Elena held the circlet with both hands, feeling an inexplicable warmth radiate from the metal, as though it recognized her the way Marta's story insisted her own blood recognized this truth long before her mind had caught up. Tears blurred her vision, grief for a mother she barely remembered mixing with something else entirely, a strange and fragile sense of belonging she had never once expected to feel. The dreams, Elena said suddenly. Marta, I have had the same dream for years, a golden hall, a woman calling me daughter, a crown dissolving into moonlight. Do you think that could truly be my mother, somehow reaching me even now? Marta's expression grew solemn. The old stories say that the moon goddess herself watches closely over bloodlines she has personally blessed, and that mothers who die protecting a sacred duty are sometimes granted the chance to guide their children from beyond, through dreams and whispers carried on moonlight. I cannot promise you that is truth rather than legend, Elena, but given everything else that has proven true tonight, I would not dismiss it so quickly anymore. A soft knock interrupted them, and one of the guards posted outside leaned in cautiously. Forgive me, but the king has returned and wishes to speak with the healer and the girl together, if you are both willing. Marta and Elena exchanged a long look, understanding passing silently between them, before Marta nodded and rose to follow the guard, Elena close behind her, still clutching the silver circlet tightly against her chest as though letting it go even for a moment might somehow undo everything she had just learned. They found Damien waiting in a small private study, Colin standing quietly near the door, both men rising the moment Elena and Marta entered. Damien's gaze fell immediately to the circlet in Elena's hands, and something in his expression shifted, the last remaining traces of doubt finally giving way entirely to certainty. Tell me everything, he said quietly, and Marta, with far more composure than she had shown moments earlier, repeated the story she had just shared with Elena, every detail of Silvermoon's fall, of Queen Isolde's final act of desperate love, of 17 years spent hiding a princess in plain sight as nothing more than a palace servant. When she finished, the room fell silent, heavy with the weight of history finally spoken aloud after so many years of careful concealment. Damien was the one to break it, his voice quiet but resolute. If this is true, and I believe with everything in me that it is, then you are not simply a survivor of a fallen kingdom, Elena. You are its rightful heir, and by every law both our peoples recognize, that makes you a princess in your own right, regardless of how long you have spent believing otherwise. He paused, something unreadable flickering across his face. It also means that whoever destroyed Silvermoon 17 years ago has just learned their crime was incomplete, and I fear they will not rest until they finish what they started. Then what do we do? Elena asked, her voice steadier now than she expected, steadied perhaps by the small circlet still warm in her hands. We protect you, Damien said simply, while we uncover exactly who was responsible for Silvermoon's fall, and why they have waited so long to act on their fears that you survived. And we do it carefully, Elena, because I suspect the answer may be closer to this palace than any of us would like to believe. His gaze flicked briefly, almost imperceptibly, toward the door, and Elena caught the exchange, understanding without needing to be told that the king already harbored suspicions about someone within his own trusted circle, suspicions he was not yet ready to speak aloud, even here, even now, surrounded by the very people he had chosen to trust with the truth of her identity. Once Marta had been escorted safely back to her chambers under heavier guard, and Colin had stepped out to check on the injured servants from the earlier attack. Damien remained behind with Elena, the study quiet, except for the low crackle of the hearth fire. "You suspect someone specific," Elena said, watching him carefully. "I saw it in your face." Damien hesitated, weighing his words with obvious care before answering. "There is an advisor within my own court, Edmund Bramwell, who has served my family for over a decade. He handled much of the diplomatic correspondence between kingdoms during the years Silvermoon still stood, and he was among the first to counsel restraint when I considered sending aid after word of the attack first reached us, all those years ago. At the time, I believed his caution came from concern for our own borders. Tonight, I find myself wondering if it came from something far less honorable." "You think he knew what was happening to Silvermoon, and said nothing?" Elena asked, her voice tightening with a grief that felt strangely personal for a kingdom she had no memory of at all. "I do not yet know," Damien admitted. "Suspicion is not proof, and I will not accuse a man who has served my family loyally for years without solid ground beneath my feet. But I intend to watch him closely from now on, and I would ask that you do the same, quietly, without drawing attention to your suspicion. If he is innocent, no harm comes from caution. If he is not, we cannot afford to let him realize we are watching before we have gathered enough proof to act." Elena nodded slowly, tucking the warning away carefully, though the idea that danger might already be walking freely through the palace's own halls, hidden behind years of trusted service, settled uneasily in her chest. "There is something else troubling me," she admitted after a moment, turning the silver circlet over gently in her hands. "Marta spoke of the moon goddess, of mothers granted the chance to guide their children through dreams. I have always believed my dream was simply grief given shape, some invented comfort my mind created to fill the silence where my past should have been. Now I do not know what to believe." "Perhaps you should trust it a while longer," Damien said quietly. "Whatever guidance has kept you safe and hidden for 17 years clearly has not steered you wrong yet." Elena managed a faint, tired smile at that, though exhaustion was beginning to press heavily behind her eyes, the events of the long night finally catching up to her all at once. Damien noticed, his expression softening slightly. "You should rest," he said. "Whatever comes next, and I suspect a great deal is coming, it will still be there in the morning. Tonight you have earned at least a few hours of peace." "Where would you have me sleep?" Elena asked. "I do not think I can return to the servants' quarters, not with smoke still clinging to the walls, and not knowing whether more attackers might return before dawn." Damien considered this for a moment, something flickering behind his eyes that looked almost like uncertainty, an emotion Elena suspected did not visit him often. "I will have a chamber prepared for you in the guest wing, with guards posted outside through the night. It is not fitting any longer for the heir of Silvermoon to sleep among the servants, whatever your own modesty might argue otherwise." Elena opened her mouth to protest, some old instinct still insisting she did not deserve such treatment, that she was still simply Elena, the servant girl who scrubbed floors and mended linens, but the words would not quite form. Perhaps, she realized with a strange, unsettling clarity, that girl no longer existed at all, and had perhaps never truly existed in the way she believed. She was something else now, someone else, a truth she was only beginning to understand the shape of. "Thank you," she said instead, quietly, and allowed Damien to lead her toward the guest wing himself, the silver circlet still held carefully against her chest, a small, warm weight that felt, for the first time in her life, like the beginning of an answer, rather than simply another question left unresolved. The silver circlet burned against Elena's skin the moment she fell asleep. She gasped awake within the dream itself, standing once again in the golden hall, except this time the pain in her chest was real, sharp and blazing, radiating from the small crescent mark on her shoulder, as though it had been set alight from within. She pressed her hand against it instinctively, and the pain eased the moment her fingers touched the mark, replaced instead by a warmth that spread steadily through her entire body. "You have finally accepted the truth," a voice said, and this time, for the first time in years of dreaming, the woman standing before her was no longer blurred and indistinct. She stood clearly now, tall and radiant, her gown flowing like liquid moonlight, her face achingly familiar in ways Elena could not fully explain, features she recognized somehow despite having no true memory of ever seeing them before. "Mother?" Elena whispered, though even as the word left her lips, she sensed this presence was something greater, something beyond even the Queen Marta had described. "Your mother watches over you as well, child, from wherever the fallen go when their duty on this earth is finished," the woman said gently. "But I am not Isolde. I am Selene, the one your people have always called the Moon Goddess, and I have guided your bloodline since long before Silvermoon ever rose from the mountains. Elena sank slowly to her knees, overwhelmed, though Selene raised a hand gently, urging her back to her feet with a warmth that felt more like comfort than command. There is no need for such formality between us, Elena. I have watched you grow since the night your mother placed you into the healer's arms and begged the moon to keep you safe. I have guided your dreams, steadied your instincts, and protected you in ways you were never meant to notice, so that you might survive long enough to stand here now, ready at last to hear the truth of what you are meant to become. Tell me, Elena said, her voice steadier than she expected. Tell me everything. Selene's expression grew solemn, the golden hall around them shifting subtly, silver light rippling across the towering pillars like moonlight reflected on water. Silvermoon was not destroyed by chance or simple greed, Elena. It was destroyed because your bloodline carries a gift older than any single kingdom, a gift tied directly to the balance between the packs of this land and the old magic that has protected them since the very first wolves walked beneath my light. What gift? Elena asked. The voice of command, Selene said, not merely the ability to control a single rogue wolf through instinct alone, as you did on the balcony, but the power, once fully awakened, to unite bloodlines and packs that have been divided for generations, to command loyalty and peace where only rivalry and bloodshed have existed before. Your ancestors used this gift to build Silvermoon into a kingdom of unmatched harmony, where wolves of many different bloodlines lived without the constant threat of war that plagues so many packs even now. Elena's mind raced, pieces falling into place with dizzying speed. Someone feared losing control over the divisions that power threatened to heal, Selene corrected gently. There are those who profit greatly from war between packs, Elena. From weapons sold and alliances brokered, and borders constantly redrawn through conflict rather than peace. Your bloodline's gift threatened to end centuries of profitable chaos, and so those who benefited from that chaos conspired to end your bloodline instead. Who? Elena demanded, urgency sharpening her voice. Selene, please, if you know who destroyed my family, tell me now. Selene's expression grew troubled, the silver light around her flickering slightly, as though even a goddess found this truth difficult to speak plainly. The threads of that conspiracy run deeper and wider than a single name, child, woven through both Blackthorn's ambitions and treachery, closer to where you now stand than you yet realize. I am permitted to guide you, Elena, but I am not permitted to hand you every answer without effort or risk on your own part. Some truths must be uncovered through your own courage, or they will not hold the weight needed to set them right. Elena wanted to press further, frustration mounting at the goddess's careful evasiveness, but something in Selene's expression told her further questioning on this matter would yield nothing more tonight. She swallowed her impatience and asked instead the question that had haunted her since the moment she first felt Damien's gaze linger on her with such unexplained intensity. What of the Alpha King? My instincts respond to him in ways I cannot explain, and his wolf seems equally drawn to me. Is that connected to this gift as well? A faint, knowing smile touched Selene's lips. The bond between you and Damien Ashgrave is a separate blessing entirely, though no less significant. The moon does not choose mates carelessly, Elena. When two souls are bound together by fate, their wolves recognize the connection long before their minds are ready to accept it, exactly as you have both been experiencing since the night you saved his sister. This bond will test you both greatly in the trials ahead, but it will also become one of your greatest strengths, should you choose to trust it fully. And if I do not wish for a bond forced upon me by fate? Elena asked, some old stubbornness rising despite the reverence she felt standing before a goddess. Selene's smile only widened slightly. The bond may be woven by fate, child, but the choice of what to do with it remains entirely your own, now and always. I do not ask you to love him simply because the moon has marked you both. I only ask that you remain open to what that connection might become, in its own time, through your own choices. The golden hall began to shimmer and fade at the edges, silver light bleeding into mist, and Elena felt the familiar pull of waking tugging at her consciousness. Wait, she said quickly, sensing the dream drawing to its close. How do I reclaim what was taken from my family? How do I stop whoever is still hunting me even now? Return to Silvermoon, Selene said, her voice growing softer as the mist thickened around her. The ruins still stand, hidden in the eastern mountains, and within them lies proof of the conspiracy that destroyed your family. Proof that has waited 17 years for someone with your blood to uncover it. But go carefully, Elena, and go only when you are ready. For the moment you set foot on Silvermoon's ruined soil, those who fear your survival will know beyond any doubt that their crime remains unfinished, and they will move against you with everything they possess. I am not afraid, Elena said, and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that the words were true. "I know," Celine said gently, her form nearly dissolved entirely into silver mist now. "That is precisely why your mother chose to save you above all else that terrible night, Elena. She saw in you, even as an infant, the same fierce heart that once made Silvermoon the brightest kingdom beneath my light. Go now, and wake steadier than you have ever been. The path ahead will not be easy, but you do not walk it alone." Elena woke with a gasp in the unfamiliar guest chamber. Sunlight already streaming through the tall windows, the silver circlet resting warm against her palm where she had fallen asleep, still clutching it tightly. Her heart pounded, not with fear this time, but with a fierce, unfamiliar resolve settling steadily into place where uncertainty had lived for so many years. A soft knock sounded at her door moments later, and she opened it to find Damien standing there himself, rather than a servant, his expression immediately sharpening with concern at whatever he saw in her face. "You look as though you have seen a ghost," he said. "Not a ghost," Elena said quietly. "A goddess." She stepped aside to let him enter, closing the door behind them both. "Damien, I know now what I must do, and I fear you are not going to like it." His expression grew wary, though he said nothing, waiting instead for her to continue, and Elena drew a steadying breath before speaking the words that would set everything that followed irrevocably into motion. "I need to return to Silvermoon." Damien's jaw tightened immediately, exactly as Elena had expected. "Absolutely not. Not while your family's killers may still be watching for any sign that you survived, and certainly not while we do not yet know how deep this conspiracy runs within my own court. Celine herself told me the ruins hold proof of who destroyed my family," Elena said, holding his gaze steadily despite the immediate resistance in his voice. "Proof that has waited 17 years for someone with my blood to find it. I cannot simply hide within these walls forever, Damien, hoping the danger eventually loses interest and moves on. You said yourself that whoever sent those wolves will not stop until they finish what they started. I would rather face that danger while seeking answers than wait helplessly for it to find me here instead." "You could be killed the moment you set foot on that soil," Damien said, frustration sharpening his tone, though Elena recognized, beneath the anger, something closer to fear than command. "I could be killed here just as easily," Elena countered gently. "At least in Silvermoon, I would be searching for something more than survival. I would be searching for the truth, and perhaps for justice for a family I barely remember, but who gave everything to protect me regardless." Damien was quiet for a long moment, pacing the length of the small guest chamber, clearly waging some private battle between his instinct to protect her and his growing understanding that Elena was no longer simply a servant girl he could shelter through orders alone. When he finally stopped and faced her again, some of the sharpness had eased from his expression, replaced by a weary, reluctant acceptance. "If you are truly resolved to go," he said slowly, "then you will not go alone. I will accompany you myself, along with Colin, and a small, trusted escort. No more than that, both to keep our numbers manageable through the mountain passes and to avoid drawing attention from anyone within my own court who might report our movements to Blackthorn or worse." "You would leave your kingdom during a time of such uncertainty?" Elena asked, surprised. "My kingdom will survive a short absence far better than it would survive losing whatever answers Silvermoon still holds," Damien said. "Besides," he added, something softer entering his voice, "I find I am no longer willing to let you walk into danger without me at your side, Elena, whatever that impulse might say about how deeply this bond has already taken root in me." Elena felt warmth rise in her cheeks, despite the gravity of their conversation, though she pushed the feeling gently aside, unwilling to let herself be distracted from the task ahead by feelings she was not yet ready to examine too closely. "Then we should prepare quickly," she said instead. "Celine warned that the moment I set foot in Silvermoon, whoever fears my survival will know beyond doubt that their crime remains unfinished. I would rather we arrive prepared for that danger than caught unaware by it." "Agreed," Damien said. "I will speak with Colin this morning and begin arranging our departure. In the meantime, you should remain within the guest wing, close to the guards I have posted, and avoid drawing unnecessary attention until we are ready to leave. Blackthorn's envoy and her father's daughter still linger within these walls awaiting my answer regarding their proposed alliance, and I would prefer she learn nothing of your identity or our plans before we are safely beyond the palace gates." Elena nodded, though the mention of Serafina sent an unexpected flicker of unease through her chest, distinct from the fear of assassins or ancient conspiracies, something smaller and more personal that she chose not to examine too closely either. "How long until we can leave?" 2 days, perhaps 3, Damien said. Long enough to gather supplies and a trustworthy escort, short enough that I do not believe our enemies will have time to properly prepare an ambush along the mountain passes, provided we move quickly and quietly once we depart. He studied her for a long moment, something unspoken passing behind his dark eyes. Are you certain of this, Elena? Once we begin down this path, there will be no simple way back to the quiet life you once knew. Elena thought of Marta's careful hiding, of 17 years spent believing herself an orphan with no history worth uncovering, of the mother she barely remembered, who had given everything to grant her the chance at survival. She thought of the silver circlet resting now on the small table beside her bed, warm and patient, waiting for her to finally claim the truth it represented. I have never been more certain of anything, she said quietly. Whatever waits for me in Silvermoon, I would rather face it as myself, fully, than continue hiding from a truth that has already found me regardless. Damien nodded slowly, something like respect settling into his expression alongside the lingering worry he could not quite hide. Then we leave in 2 days, he said. And Elena, whatever we find in those ruins, whatever danger follows us there, I promise, you will not face it alone. Not this time, and not ever again, if I have any say in the matter. He left shortly after to begin the preparations, and Elena remained behind in the quiet guest chamber, turning the silver circlet over slowly in her hands, watching sunlight catch against its tarnished surface. For the first time since the night on the balcony had upended her entire understanding of herself, she felt something steadier than fear settling into her chest, a quiet, resolute certainty that whatever trials awaited her in the mountains ahead, she was finally ready to meet them, as the person she had always been destined to become. The dagger struck the doorframe an inch from Elena's head, before she even registered someone had thrown it. She spun around, heart slamming against her ribs, to find one of Blackthorn's own guards standing at the end of the guest wing corridor. His expression twisted with a fury that made no sense, until Elena noticed Serafina standing just behind him. Her composed mask cracked open into something colder and far more dangerous. You, Serafina hissed, striding forward despite her guard's attempt to hold her back. The servant girl. I heard the whispers this morning. Guards speaking of a hidden princess, of Silvermoon's crest matching some mark on a palace servant's shoulder. Tell me it is not true. Elena's mind raced, understanding immediately that whatever careful secrecy Damien had tried to maintain had already begun leaking through the palace despite his precautions. I do not know what you have heard, she said carefully, but I would ask that you lower your guard's blade before this conversation goes any further than words. My father sent me here to secure an alliance through marriage, Serafina snapped, ignoring the request entirely. And now I learn the Alpha King's attention has been captured instead, by some servant girl playing at royal blood. Do you have any idea what you are interfering with? I am interfering with nothing, Elena said, striving to keep her voice level despite the pounding of her heart. Whatever exists between myself and the king is not something I invented despite your father's proposal. Serafina's eyes narrowed dangerously, and for a moment, Elena feared the confrontation might turn violent regardless of her attempts to de-escalate it, but the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted them both, and Colin appeared at the end of the corridor with 2 additional guards, his expression thunderous. Lady Serafina, he said, his voice carrying a warning edge despite its outward courtesy, I must insist you and your guard return to your quarters immediately. Throwing blades within the palace, regardless of provocation, will not be tolerated. Serafina's jaw tightened, though she seemed to recognize the futility of further argument against 3 armed guards. This is not finished, she said, casting one last venomous look toward Elena before allowing herself to be escorted away, her own guard trailing reluctantly behind her. Colin turned to Elena the moment they were gone, his expression softening slightly with concern. Are you harmed? No, Elena said, though her voice shook more than she wanted to admit. But Colin, if the palace guards are already whispering about my identity, how long before word reaches beyond these walls entirely? Too soon, I fear, Colin admitted grimly. The king must be told immediately. They found Damien in the Great Hall, in the middle of what appeared to be a tense meeting with several of his senior advisors, including a tall, silver-haired man Elena did not recognize, his expression carefully neutral in a way that immediately set her instincts on edge. Damien's gaze snapped up the moment Elena entered, reading the tension in her face instantly. What happened? He demanded, already rising from his seat. Blackthorn's envoy knows, Elena said simply, or at least suspects enough to be dangerous. Her guard threw a blade at me only moments ago. A murmur of alarm rippled through the gathered advisors, and the silver-haired man Elena did not recognize stepped forward, his expression carefully composed despite the shock rippling through the room. Forgive my confusion, my lord. But what exactly does the servant girl mean by Blackthorn suspecting her identity? Damien's jaw tightened, and Elena understood, with a sudden cold certainty, exactly who this man must be before Damien even spoke his name. Edmund, Damien said carefully, there are matters that have come to light recently which I have not yet shared with the full council. Matters concerning Elena's true heritage. Edmund Bramwell's expression flickered, quick and difficult to read, before smoothing back into practiced neutrality. Her heritage, my lord? Forgive me, but the girl has always been known simply as an orphan taken in by palace charity. That is no longer believed to be the case, Damien said, watching the advisor's reaction closely even as he spoke. Evidence has come to light suggesting Elena is in fact the surviving heir of Silvermoon's royal bloodline, hidden here in secret since the night the kingdom fell 17 years ago. Silence fell across the great hall, heavy and absolute. Every advisor present turning to stare at Elena with expressions ranging from disbelief to something closer to wary calculation. Edmund Bramwell's face, however, remained the one Elena watched most closely, searching for any flicker of guilt or fear that might confirm Damien's suspicions, though the older man's composure held admirably steady, betraying nothing beyond carefully measured surprise. That is remarkable news, my lord, Edmund said finally, his voice smooth and even. If true, it changes a great deal regarding the political landscape we now find ourselves navigating. Silvermoon's fall was a tragedy many still remember with sorrow. Its rightful heir returning after so many years would carry significant weight among the surrounding packs, weight that could prove either very useful or very dangerous, depending on how carefully the truth is managed from here forward. Which is precisely why I intend to keep this council's discussion regarding the matter strictly confined to this room, Damien said, his gaze sweeping deliberately across every advisor present. Word has already begun spreading among Blackthorn's envoy despite my efforts at discretion, which tells me someone within these walls has already spoken carelessly, or worse, deliberately. The accusation hung heavily in the air, and Elena watched several advisors shift uncomfortably under the weight of Damien's scrutiny, though Edmund Bramwell alone remained perfectly composed, meeting the king's gaze without flinching, an unnerving steadiness that Elena found more suspicious than any outward sign of guilt could have been. I assure you, my lord, Edmund said calmly, none of us would betray a confidence of such significance carelessly. Perhaps the servants themselves grew loose-lipped, given the excitement surrounding recent events within the palace. Damien's expression remained unreadable, though Elena saw the muscle tighten faintly along his jaw, the same tension she had come to recognize as barely restrained suspicion he was not yet willing to voice aloud in front of the full council. Regardless of the source, he said instead, I intend to move forward with plans already discussed privately. Elena and I, along with a small trusted escort, will depart for the Silvermoon ruins within 2 days' time, seeking evidence that may finally reveal who was truly responsible for the kingdom's destruction. A dangerous undertaking, my lord, Edmund said smoothly, particularly given how quickly word of her survival now seems to be spreading. Might I suggest a larger escort, for the princess's protection? A smaller party moves faster and draws less attention, Damien replied evenly. I have already made my decision on the matter, Edmund, though I appreciate your concern. The meeting concluded shortly after, advisors filing out with expressions still shadowed by the magnitude of what they had just learned, leaving Damien, Elena, and Colin alone in the great hall. The moment the last advisor had gone, Damien turned to Colin, his composure finally cracking to reveal the sharp worry beneath. Watch Edmund closely from this moment forward, he said quietly. Have someone monitor his correspondence, discreetly, without alerting him to the scrutiny. If he is the one who has been feeding information to Blackthorn or whoever else may be involved in Silvermoon's fall, I want proof before we leave for the ruins, not suspicion alone. It will be done, Colin said, already turning to arrange it. Once they were alone, Damien turned to Elena, reaching out to gently touch the small scrape still visible near her temple, where the thrown dagger had struck the doorframe close enough to nick her skin as it passed. His fingers lingered there, careful and warm, and Elena found herself leaning slightly into the touch before she could stop herself. I should have kept you further from the court's notice, Damien murmured, his voice thick with something between guilt and quiet fury. I underestimated how quickly this would spread. You cannot protect me from every danger simply by keeping me hidden, Elena said softly. Celine herself told me that path leads only to more fear, not less. I would rather face what comes now, together, than spend more years pretending to be someone I am not. Damien's expression softened at that, something raw and unguarded passing behind his dark eyes as he studied her face in the quiet aftermath of the council meeting's tension. You are remarkable, Elena, whatever crown you were born beneath. I hope you know that, Regardless of everything else this truth has upended. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, unable to look away from the sincerity in his gaze, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, the weight of the mate bond Celine had described settling more firmly into place between them with each passing heartbeat. Undeniable now in ways neither of them could easily dismiss any longer. "We should prepare for the journey," Elena finally said, breaking the charged silence before it could pull her somewhere she was not yet ready to follow. "Yes," Damien agreed quietly, though his gaze lingered on her a moment longer before he finally stepped back, composing himself once more into the careful mask of a king, with far too many burdens still waiting to be addressed. 2 days, Elena, and then we finally begin uncovering the truth, together." The following day, Colin found Elena in the palace training yard shortly after sunrise, standing alone near the edge of the sparring circle, watching 2 young warriors practice their forms with quiet, focused attention. "You should learn to defend yourself properly," Colin said, approaching with a wooden practice blade in each hand. "Whatever instinct guided you against that rogue on the balcony, or against the wolf that attacked the servants' quarters, instinct alone will not be enough if we encounter real danger along the mountain passes." Elena accepted the offered blade somewhat hesitantly. "I have never held a weapon before in my life, Colin." "Then it is past time you learned," he said simply, adopting a ready stance across from her. Silvermoon's queens were said to be skilled fighters in their own right, not merely rulers who sat safely behind palace walls while others defended them. If that bloodline runs true in you, we may discover you have more natural ability than you expect. To Elena's surprise, Colin's words proved accurate. Though clumsy at first, her body seemed to remember movements her mind had never consciously learned, footwork and balance settling into place with an ease that startled them both. By the time the sun had climbed fully into the sky, she had disarmed Colin twice, each time more smoothly than the last, and the seasoned guard captain regarded her with open astonishment. 17 years hidden as a servant, he murmured. "And still your blood remembers what your mind never had the chance to learn. Remarkable." They trained for another hour before Colin finally called an end to the session, both of them breathing hard, sweat beading along Elena's brow despite the cool morning air. "You will not master swordplay in 2 days," he said, "but you have learned enough to defend yourself if the need arises, and that alone may prove the difference between survival and disaster along our journey." Elena thanked him warmly before returning to the guest wing to clean up, her muscles aching in ways that felt strangely satisfying, evidence of effort spent toward something that mattered deeply. She spent the remainder of the day assisting Marta with preparations for the journey, gathering herbs and supplies the old healer insisted they could not travel without, grateful for the familiar rhythm of useful work to steady her nerves against the uncertainty still waiting ahead. That evening, as the palace settled into the quiet hush of approaching night, Damien found her once more in the gardens near the fountain, where their conversation days earlier had first hinted at the bond growing steadily between them. He carried 2 cups of warm spiced wine, offering one to her silently as he settled onto the stone bench beside her. "Tomorrow we leave," he said quietly, watching the moon rise slowly above the palace walls. "I confess I have not slept well these past few nights, turning over every possible danger the mountain passes might hold." "Nor have I," Elena admitted, accepting the warm cup gratefully. "Though my dreams, at least, no longer frighten me the way they once did. Celine's presence has become something closer to comfort now than mystery." "I envy that certainty," Damien said, a faint, rueful smile touching his lips. "I have ruled this kingdom since I was barely more than a boy, thrust into responsibility long before I felt ready for it, and still I find myself uncertain more often than I would ever admit publicly." Elena studied his profile in the moonlight, struck by the unexpected vulnerability in his admission. "You have carried that burden well, Damien. Whatever doubts you harbor privately, your people clearly love and trust you." "Perhaps," he said, "though lately I find myself wondering if I have grown too cautious, too guarded against risk, when perhaps some risks are worth taking regardless of the danger they carry." His gaze shifted to meet hers directly, something warm and unguarded flickering behind his dark eyes. "You have taught me that, these past days, more than you likely realize." Elena's breath caught, the quiet intimacy of the moment settling warmly between them despite the uncertainty of tomorrow's journey looming just beyond tonight's fragile peace. "We should rest," she said softly, though she made no move to rise, reluctant to end the moment before it needed to end. "Soon," Damien agreed, though he too remained seated, the two of them lingering together beneath the rising moon a while longer, drawing whatever quiet comfort they could from each other's presence before the dangers of tomorrow finally arrived to claim them both. The first arrow whistled past Elena's ear, before she even heard the bowstring release. She dropped instinctively, the practiced motion Colin had drilled into her over the past 2 days, saving her life, as the arrow buried itself into the pine tree, exactly where her head had been a heartbeat earlier. Chaos erupted immediately across the narrow mountain trail, their small traveling party scattering for cover as more arrows rained down from the ridge above. "Ambush!" Colin shouted, already pulling his blade free, shielding Elena's body with his own as he scanned the tree line for the source of the attack. "Shields up, protect the princess." Damien was beside her in an instant, half shifted already, his eyes blazing with fury as he took in the danger surrounding them. "How many?" he demanded of Colin. "Too many to count from here," Colin answered grimly. "At least a dozen archers on the ridge, possibly more waiting below." Elena's heart pounded as she pressed herself against the rocky outcropping Damien had pulled her behind, watching 2 of their guards fall back with arrows lodged in their shoulders, wincing but alive, their thick hides having spared them from more serious wounds. The narrow mountain pass offered little cover, and Elena understood immediately that whoever had planned this ambush had chosen the location with brutal precision. "We cannot simply wait here to be picked off," Damien said, his voice tight with barely contained fury. "Colin, take 2 guards and flank left along the lower ridge. I will take the right. Elena, stay hidden behind this outcropping no matter what happens. Do you understand me?" "I am not going to simply hide while you all risk your lives," Elena protested, though even as she spoke, another volley of arrows forced her back against the stone, adrenaline and fear warring fiercely within her chest. "You are the one they came here to kill," Damien said, his gaze fierce and unyielding. "Please, Elena, I cannot fight properly if I am also worried about protecting you at the same moment." The plea in his voice, beneath the command, finally convinced her, and Elena nodded reluctantly, pressing herself as small as possible against the stone, as Damien and Colin split off in opposite directions, guards moving with them, leaving her alone behind the rocky outcropping with only her borrowed practice blade for protection. The sounds of battle erupted almost immediately, snarls and shouts and the clash of steel against steel echoing off the narrow canyon walls, and Elena's every instinct screamed at her to help, to do something, rather than crouch helplessly while people she cared for fought and possibly died on her behalf. She gripped the blade tightly, forcing herself to breathe steadily despite the chaos surrounding her. A shadow fell across her hiding place, and Elena spun, blade raised, only to find a lone attacker had slipped past the main battle entirely, clearly sent specifically to finish what the ambush's arrows had failed to accomplish. He was broad and scarred, moving with the deliberate confidence of someone who had killed many times before, and Elena's blood ran cold as she recognized, in his eyes, the same calculating coldness she had seen in the trained wolf that attacked the servants' quarters. "The lost princess," he sneered, advancing slowly. "Voss will pay handsomely for your head, girl, alive or otherwise." Voss. The name confirmed what Elena had already begun to suspect, though hearing it spoken aloud sent a fresh wave of cold fury through her chest, burning away some of the fear that had gripped her only moments before. "Then Voss will be disappointed," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice, and lunged. The fight that followed was brutal and fast, Elena's borrowed training proving desperately insufficient against an opponent so clearly experienced, several near misses leaving thin cuts along her arms as she barely managed to deflect his blade each time. But her body continued responding with that same strange, inherited instinct that had guided her against the rogue on the balcony, some ancient memory in her blood refusing to let her fall no matter how outmatched she felt. She finally found an opening when he overextended his last strike, and Elena drove her elbow hard into his throat, sending him staggering backward, choking, giving her precious seconds to scramble away from his reach. But before she could gain further distance, a second attacker emerged from the tree line, and Elena realized with a sinking heart that she had been specifically targeted by more than one enemy at once. "Elena!" Damien's roar cut across the chaos, and he crashed through the underbrush a moment later, fully shifted now, his massive dark form colliding with the second attacker with devastating force. The man barely had time to scream before Damien's fury drove him back and away entirely, and Elena took the momentary distraction to finish dealing with her first attacker, who had recovered enough to lunge at her again. This time her instincts guided her true. She caught his wrist as his blade swung wide, twisted hard, and drove her own weapon home, with a precision that surprised even herself, ending the threat decisively. She stood there afterward, breathing hard, staring down at what she had just done, the reality of violence settling heavily into her chest even as relief flooded through her that she had survived it. The wider battle wound down soon after, Damien's forces gaining the upper hand once the ambushers realized their numbers had been thinned too severely to continue the assault. The remaining attackers fled back over the ridge, leaving several of their own behind, and Colin's voice rang out moments later confirming that their own party, while wounded, had survived largely intact. Damien shifted back the moment the danger passed, rushing to Elena's side, his eyes wide with barely restrained panic as he took in the blood on her sleeves, uncertain at first whose it belonged to. "Are you hurt?" "Only scratches," Elena assured him, though her voice trembled with the aftermath of adrenaline finally beginning to fade. "Damien," he spoke a name. "Voss. He said Voss would pay for my head." Damien's expression darkened considerably. "Alpha Voss of Blackthorn. This confirms what I feared most, that this was never truly about a marriage alliance at all. Blackthorn has been hunting you since the moment word of your survival reached them, likely through whoever has been leaking information from within my own court." "Then Edmund truly is involved," Elena said, her stomach turning at the confirmation of a suspicion she had hoped, despite everything, might prove unfounded. "We do not yet have absolute proof," Damien said carefully, though his tone made clear he now believed it just as strongly as she did. "But this ambush was too precisely placed, too perfectly timed to our departure, to be coincidence alone. Someone within my palace informed Blackthorn of our route and timing." Colin approached then, his expression grim as he surveyed the aftermath of the battle. "3 of our guards wounded, none fatally, thank the goddess. 4 of the ambushers dead, the rest fled back toward Blackthorn territory. My lord, I recovered this from one of the fallen." He held out a small, folded piece of parchment, sealed with wax bearing a crest Elena did not recognize. Damien took it carefully, breaking the seal, his expression growing steadily colder as he read the contents within. When he finally looked up, his jaw was tight with barely contained fury. "Instructions," he said, "detailing our exact route and departure time, signed with no name, but sealed with a crest belonging to my own council chambers." He crumpled the parchment slowly in his fist. "Edmund Bramwell has betrayed us, Elena, and worse, he has been working directly with the very forces responsible for Silvermoon's destruction." Elena felt a chill settle deep into her bones despite the warm afternoon sun now filtering through the mountain pines. "Then we cannot return to the palace as though nothing has changed. If he learns we survived this ambush, he may act more directly next time, or worse, prepare an even larger force to intercept us before we ever reach the ruins." "We press forward," Damien said firmly, tucking the crumpled parchment away for safekeeping. "Silvermoon's ruins are now closer than the palace behind us, and I would rather find the proof we need before Edmund realizes his ambush has failed entirely." He turned to Colin. "Tend to the wounded as best you can, then we move immediately. I do not want to remain in this pass any longer than necessary, in case Blackthorn sends a second wave to finish what the first failed to accomplish." As their small, battered party regrouped and prepared to continue deeper into the mountains, Elena found herself walking beside Damien in tense, watchful silence, the weight of the day's violence and betrayal settling heavily between them. She thought of Edmund's carefully composed expression during the council meeting days earlier, of how easily he had masked whatever treachery lay beneath his calm exterior, and understood, with a grim certainty that hardened something inside her chest, that the enemies circling her were far closer and far more numerous than she had ever imagined possible. They made camp that evening in a sheltered hollow between 2 steep ridges, far enough from the main trail that Colin judged it reasonably safe from immediate pursuit, though he still posted double watches through the night regardless. Marta, who had insisted on joining the journey despite her age, moved carefully among the wounded guards, cleaning and stitching what injuries she could by firelight, her weathered hands steady despite the day's earlier terror. Elena sat near the fire afterward, watching the flames dance while Marta finished tending to a shallow cut along her forearm, one of several small wounds she had earned during the ambush. "You fought well today," Marta said quietly, tying off the last of the bandage with practiced efficiency. "Your mother would have been proud, though I suspect she would also have scolded you thoroughly for taking such risks." "I did not feel as though I had much choice," Elena admitted. "The moment that man came for me, something inside simply took over." "That is the blood remembering itself," Marta said. "Just as it did on the balcony, just as it has each time your instincts have carried you through danger you should not have survived. It grows stronger the more you trust it, Elena. I have watched it happen before your very eyes these past days." Across the small camp, Elena noticed Colin speaking quietly with Damien, both men's expressions tight with concern, as they examined something Colin had apparently found among the fallen ambushers' belongings. She rose and crossed to join them, curiosity overriding her exhaustion. "What have you found?" she asked. Colin held up a small leather pouch, its contents spilling onto his palm. A collection of coins bearing a mint mark Elena did not recognize alongside a second folded parchment. This one water-damaged but still partially legible. "Payment," Colin said grimly, "and further instructions. Though much of the writing has been ruined, what remains suggests this ambush was only the first of several planned attempts, positioned along multiple routes leading toward the Silvermoon ruins, in case we chose a different path than the one Edmund apparently reported." "They expected us to try alternate routes," Damien said, his expression darkening further. "Which means whoever planned this, likely Voss himself working alongside Edmund's information, anticipated a lengthy hunt rather than a single decisive strike. This runs deeper, and has been prepared more thoroughly than I initially believed." "How many more ambushes might be waiting?" Elena asked, unease tightening in her chest. "I do not know," Damien admitted, "but it tells me we cannot continue along any predictable path. From here, we leave the main trail entirely, and cut through less traveled terrain, even if it slows our progress considerably. Better a longer journey than walking directly into another prepared trap." Colin nodded in agreement, already studying the rough map spread across a flat stone near the fire, tracing alternate routes with a calloused finger, while murmuring calculations about distance and terrain difficulty under his breath. Elena returned to her place by the fire sometime later, unable to fully settle despite her exhaustion, her mind churning over the scope of the conspiracy now revealing itself. Multiple ambushes prepared along multiple routes, suggested resources and coordination, far beyond a single embittered advisor, or a single ambitious alpha acting alone. Whoever truly stood behind Silvermoon's destruction 17 years ago had clearly maintained careful watch ever since, prepared to act decisively the moment their fears of a surviving heir were confirmed. She glanced toward Damien, who stood a short distance away, staring silently into the darkness beyond their small camp, his shoulders tight with a tension that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. Elena rose quietly and joined him, saying nothing at first, simply standing beside him in shared, watchful silence beneath the star-scattered mountain sky. "I am sorry," Damien finally said, without turning to look at her. "I promised you would not face this alone, and yet today I nearly failed to protect you at all." "You did not fail," Elena said firmly. "We are both still standing, Damien. That is not failure, whatever fear still lingers from how close it came." He turned to face her then, something raw and unguarded flickering across his features in the dim firelight. "I do not know what I would have done, Elena, if that blade had found you instead of the man you fought so bravely against." Elena held his gaze steadily, feeling the weight of the day's danger settle into something quieter and more intimate between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of how deeply their fates had already become entangled, whatever uncertainty still remained about what that entanglement would ultimately mean for either of them. Neither spoke further, but neither moved away either, and they remained there together a while longer, watching the darkness for any further sign of danger, drawing whatever quiet strength they could from each other's presence, before the exhausted camp finally settled into an uneasy, watchful rest. The howl that split the night was not a wolf's call at all, but a warning, and Elena was on her feet before she had even fully woken. She scrambled out of her bedroll to find the camp already stirring, guards reaching for weapons, Colin barking low orders as he moved swiftly toward the edge of their small hollow. Damien appeared at her side instantly, his expression tight with alert focus. "Scouts," he said quietly. Colin heard movement along the ridge. "It may be nothing, animals disturbed by our fire, or it may be another attempt to finish what the ambush failed to accomplish." Elena's pulse quickened, though the fear that gripped her now felt different from the raw panic of the ambush days earlier, sharpened instead into something steadier, more controlled. She reached for the practice blade Colin had given her, gripping it with hands that barely trembled at all. They waited in tense silence for what felt like an eternity, every rustle of wind through the pines sending fresh spikes of adrenaline through the camp, until finally Colin returned from his careful scouting circuit, tension easing slightly from his shoulders. "A pair of mountain cats, nothing more," he reported. "Though given everything that has happened, I would rather we err toward caution than assume any noise in these mountains is harmless from now on." The camp slowly settled back into uneasy rest, though Elena found sleep impossible to reclaim, her mind still racing with adrenaline and the lingering weight of danger that seemed to follow them at every turn. She left her bedroll quietly, careful not to disturb the others, and made her way to a small outcropping overlooking the valley below, needing space to simply breathe beneath the vast mountain sky. Damien found her there within minutes, unsurprised, as though some invisible thread between them had guided him directly to her side without need for searching. "You should be resting," he said gently, settling beside her on the cold stone. So should you, Elena countered, though she made no move to send him away, grateful instead for his quiet presence beside her. They sat together in comfortable silence for a long while, watching moonlight ripple silver across the valley below, the earlier tension of the false alarm slowly fading into something calmer, more contemplative. It was Damien who finally spoke again, his voice quieter and more uncertain than Elena had ever heard from him. "Celine told you of the bond between us," he said. "I have felt it since the night on the balcony, though I did not understand what I was feeling until recently. My wolf has never responded to anyone the way it responds to you, Elena. Not once, in all my years as Alpha." "I feel it too," Elena admitted softly, "though I confess I do not entirely know what to do with it, given everything else happening around us." "Nor do I," Damien said, a faint, rueful smile touching his lips. "I have spent my entire reign making careful, calculated decisions for the good of my kingdom, weighing every choice against duty and consequence. This is the first time in years I have felt something that refuses to be calculated or reasoned away, no matter how hard I try." Elena turned to study his face in the moonlight, struck by the vulnerability in his admission, so different from the composed, guarded king she had first known only days earlier. "Perhaps not everything needs to be calculated," she said quietly. "Perhaps some things are simply meant to be felt." Something shifted in Damien's expression at her words, warmth kindling behind his dark eyes as he reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wished, and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Elena did not pull away. Instead, she found herself leaning slightly into his touch, her heart racing with something entirely different from the fear that had gripped her only hours earlier. "Elena," he murmured, his voice low and rough with restrained emotion, "whatever crown you were born beneath, whatever destiny awaits you in those ruins, I find that none of it changes how I feel standing here with you now. I have fought this bond since the moment I first suspected it, telling myself a king cannot simply follow his wolf's instincts without careful thought. But I am done fighting it, if you will allow me to stop." "I do not want you to fight it either," Elena whispered, her own voice barely steady, and closed the small remaining distance between them. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, tentative, as though both of them still expected the moment to shatter beneath the weight of everything uncertain still surrounding them. But it deepened slowly, warmth spreading through Elena's chest like sunlight breaking through winter clouds, the mate bond Celine had described settling fully into place between them, undeniable now in a way that left no room for doubt or hesitation. When they finally parted, Damien rested his forehead gently against hers, both of them breathing unsteadily, the vast mountain sky stretching silent, and stars scattered above them. "I should have done that days ago," he murmured, a faint laugh coloring his voice despite everything. "We had a rogue wolf and an ambush to survive first," Elena said, laughing softly despite herself, the sound feeling strange and precious after so many days of fear and tension. They remained together on the outcropping a while longer, talking quietly of smaller things, of Damien's childhood before he became king, of the few scattered memories Elena carried from her earliest years before Marta brought her to safety, each sharing pieces of themselves that had nothing to do with crowns or conspiracies or ancient bloodlines. For a brief while, beneath the moonlight, they were simply two people discovering something precious and unexpected between them, free from the weight of destiny pressing in on every other corner of their lives. The peace did not last through the morning. They broke camp at first light, continuing along the alternate route Colin had charted the previous evening, moving carefully through terrain thick with underbrush and loose stone that made for slow, exhausting progress. By midday, the mountains had grown steeper, the ruins of Silvermoon supposedly waiting just beyond the next ridge according to Colin's careful calculations, and tension began building steadily within the group as their destination drew closer. It was Marta who first noticed the smoke rising faintly against the pale afternoon sky, far ahead along their intended path. "That is not natural," she said, drawing everyone's attention. "No forest fire burns that steadily, nor that thin. Something is burning deliberately up ahead." Damien's expression tightened immediately, his gaze meeting Colin's in silent, grim understanding. "Another ambush, waiting to draw us in. Or a trap meant to slow us further while a larger force circles around from behind," Colin said grimly. "Either way, we cannot simply walk toward it blindly." Elena felt the earlier warmth of the previous night's tenderness give way rapidly to the cold, familiar tightness of fear, the brief peace they had found beneath the stars already fading beneath the renewed weight of danger pressing in around them once more. She looked to Damien, finding his expression fierce with protective determination, and understood, with quiet certainty, that whatever waited ahead, They would face it together now in every sense that mattered, bound not merely by fate or ancient prophecy, but by a choice they had both finally allowed themselves to make. "Then we go carefully," Damien said, "and we go together. Whatever Voss and Edmund have prepared for us this time, they will find we do not break so easily as they clearly hope." The party pressed onward with renewed caution, the smoke on the horizon growing steadily closer with each careful step, and Elena gripped her blade a little tighter, drawing strength from the steady presence of Damien beside her, ready to face whatever danger awaited them at the threshold of her family's ruined kingdom. They moved slower now, Colin scouting ahead at regular intervals while the rest of the party kept low along the tree line, avoiding open ground wherever the terrain allowed it. As they crested the final ridge before the source of the smoke, the reason for it became suddenly clear, and far more troubling than any of them had anticipated. A small hunting camp, likely belonging to travelers or scouts unrelated to their own journey, had been burned to the ground, its occupants nowhere in sight, though scattered belongings and overturned supplies suggested a hasty, violent departure rather than a planned fire. Damien crouched beside the smoldering remains, examining the scene with a hunter's careful eye. "This was not meant for us specifically," he said slowly. "But whoever did this passed through recently, and recently enough that they may still be nearby. Scouts for Voss, perhaps, searching this route as well," Colin suggested grimly. "Or simply raiders taking advantage of the unrest already stirring through these mountains since word of Elena's survival began spreading." Marta knelt beside a scattered pile of supplies, lifting a torn scrap of cloth marked with a small, embroidered symbol, her expression turning grave as she studied it. "This belongs to Blackthorn Scouts. I recognize the stitching pattern from years ago, when Silvermoon still maintained trade relations with their kingdom before everything fell apart." "Then Voss's forces are already moving through this territory," Damien said, rising and scanning the surrounding tree line with renewed urgency. "We need to move quickly, before they circle back this way, or send word ahead of our position." They pressed on with heightened caution, skirting wide around the ruined camp, every shadow among the trees now feeling charged with potential danger. Elena found her senses sharpening steadily the closer they drew to their destination, an inexplicable pull settling into her chest that she recognized, with quiet wonder, as something like recognition, as though some deep, buried part of her already knew this land despite having no true memory of it. It was nearly dusk when they finally emerged from the dense tree line onto a wide, overgrown plateau, and Elena's breath caught sharply in her throat at the sight that greeted them. Silvermoon's ruins stretched before them in the fading light, once magnificent towers now crumbled and hollow, silver stonework still visible beneath centuries of ivy and decay, unmistakably beautiful even in its devastation. A great archway, cracked but still standing, marked what must have once been the kingdom's main gate, its carved crescent moon motif matching precisely the mark Elena had hidden beneath her collar her entire life. "Silvermoon," Damien murmured beside her, his voice hushed with something between awe and sorrow. Elena stepped forward slowly, drawn by an instinct she could not fully explain, tears gathering unbidden in her eyes as she took in the ruined majesty of the home she had never truly known, yet somehow recognized in every broken stone and crumbling tower. Grief and wonder tangled together in her chest, overwhelming in their combined weight, and for a long moment she simply stood at the threshold, unable to move further. "Are you ready?" Damien asked gently, coming to stand beside her, his hand finding hers and squeezing softly in silent support. "I do not know," Elena admitted honestly, "but I do not think readiness is something I can wait for any longer. Whatever waits within these walls, answers or danger or both, I need to face it now." Colin moved ahead first, scanning the ruins carefully for any sign of ambush before signaling the rest of the party forward, and together they passed beneath the cracked archway, stepping for the first time onto the ruined soil of Silvermoon, the weight of 17 years of secrets pressing down around them with every careful step deeper into the fallen kingdom's heart. Somewhere in the deepening twilight, a low horn sounded faintly in the distance, and Damien's expression turned instantly grim, recognizing, as Elena did a heartbeat later, that their presence within the ruins had already been noticed by someone far less welcoming than the ghosts of a fallen kingdom. "Positions," Colin called quietly, drawing his blade once more, the exhausted guards falling swiftly into a defensive formation around Elena, despite the long day's travel already weighing heavily on them all. Damien pulled Elena gently but firmly behind him, his gaze fixed on the tree line beyond the ruined gate, searching for the first sign of movement. "Whatever is coming," he said quietly, "we hold this ground. Silvermoon has waited 17 years for its heir to return. I will not let it fall silent again without a fight." Elena's heart pounded fiercely in her chest. Fear and determination tangled together in equal measure, as the horn sounded a second time, closer now, and the first shadows began to stir at the edge of the fallen kingdom's broken gate. The shadows at the broken gate resolved into wolves, dozens of them, pouring silently over the crumbled walls of Silvermoon with terrible, coordinated purpose. "Now!" Colin shouted, and their small party braced together as the first wave crashed into them, steel meeting fang in a chaos of snarls and shouted commands. Elena fought at Damien's side, her borrowed training finally paying its full price, every strike guided by instinct that felt less like learning and more like remembering something her body had always known. A massive gray wolf broke through the guard's line, driving straight for Elena with unmistakable intent, and she barely raised her blade in time to deflect its lunge, the impact jarring painfully up her arm. Before she could recover, Damien was there, shifting mid-stride and slamming into the attacking wolf with brutal force, driving it back long enough for Elena to scramble to safer footing. "There are too many," one of the guards shouted, falling back as 3 more wolves pressed through the widening gaps in their defensive line. Elena's mind raced desperately for options, and then, with sudden clarity, she remembered Celine's words about the ancient gift running through her bloodline, the voice of command capable of uniting divided packs. She had used it once before, instinctively, against the rogue on the balcony. Perhaps here, in the ruins of her own ancestral home, that gift might answer more fully than it ever had before. She drew a steadying breath, planted her feet firmly against the ruined stone beneath her, and let her voice ring out with everything she had, every ounce of grief and fury and desperate hope she carried for the kingdom she barely remembered, but had already come to love fiercely regardless. "Stand down." The word carried something far greater than it had on the balcony, rippling outward like a physical force, and for one suspended, impossible moment, every wolf on the battlefield froze, ears flattening, bodies going rigid as though caught between conflicting commands warring within their very blood. Several of the attacking wolves whined and backed away entirely, some even shifting back into human form, kneeling instinctively as though some ancient loyalty buried deep within their lineage had suddenly, violently reasserted itself. But not all of them. A handful continued their assault regardless, apparently bound too tightly to whoever commanded them to be swayed even by the ancient authority in Elena's voice, and Damien used the sudden confusion to devastating advantage, driving back the remaining attackers with Colin and the guards rallying fiercely at his side. Within minutes, the battle turned decisively in their favor, the confused and divided attacking force scattering back over the broken walls, leaving only a handful of captured wolves kneeling in submission upon the ruined ground, along with several who had simply fled the confusion entirely. Elena stood trembling in the aftermath, the enormity of what she had just done settling slowly over her exhausted mind. Damien shifted back immediately, rushing to her side, his expression a mixture of awe and fierce protectiveness. "You did it," he said, disbelief coloring his voice. "Elena, you turned half their forces with your voice alone." "I do not fully understand how," she admitted, her legs suddenly unsteady beneath her, though Damien's steady arm caught her before she could stumble. A commotion near the captured wolves drew their attention, and Colin approached, dragging forward one of the kneeling, now human, prisoners, his expression grim with recognition. "My lord, you should hear what this one has to say." The captured man, still shaking from whatever had broken within him during Elena's command, looked up with wide, frightened eyes. "I did not know," he stammered. "I swear it, my lord. We were told only that a dangerous traitor to Blackthorn's peace had fled into these ruins, that our task was simply to capture her. I did not know we were being sent against Silvermoon's true heir." "Who gave you these orders?" Damien demanded. "Alpha Voss himself," the man said. "Though the plans, the routes, the timing of every ambush along the way, those came through a contact within your own court, my lord. I heard Voss speak the name once, during preparations, Bramwell." The confirmation, though expected, still landed with heavy finality, and Damien's expression hardened into something cold and resolute. "Edmund has been feeding Voss information for weeks, perhaps longer," he said. "Enough to plan multiple ambushes across multiple routes, enough to know precisely when and where we would arrive here at the ruins." "There is more," the captured man said quickly, clearly eager to secure whatever leniency his cooperation might earn him. "Alpha Voss does not act merely to protect old secrets about Silvermoon's fall, my lord. He seeks the girl specifically because Silvermoon's old records, kept somewhere within these very ruins, are said to hold proof of an agreement, a debt owed to Voss's own father by the conspirators who orchestrated the kingdom's destruction 17 years ago. If that proof surfaces now, It would destroy Voss's standing among the northern packs entirely. Elena's breath caught sharply. Then the records we seek could expose him directly, not merely confirm his father's crime. It appears so, Damien said grimly, before turning back to the trembling prisoner. Where are these records kept? Precisely, within the ruins. I do not know exactly, the man admitted. Only that Voss's scouts have searched the old royal archive extensively these past weeks without success. He believes the location was sealed away by magic older than his own bloodline, accessible perhaps only to Silvermoon's true heir. Every gaze turned toward Elena then, the weight of expectation settling heavily onto her shoulders, and she felt, beneath the exhaustion and lingering fear of battle, a fierce and steady resolve kindling in its place. Then take me to the royal archive, she said. If this gift in my blood can open what Voss's forces could not, I intend to use it. Colin secured the remaining prisoners under guard while Damien led Elena deeper into the ruins, following faded memories of old maps and the instinctive pull Elena continued to feel growing steadily stronger with every step closer to the heart of the fallen palace. They found the archive at last within a partially collapsed tower, its heavy stone door marked with the same crescent moon crest that adorned Elena's shoulder, sealed shut despite centuries of decay surrounding it. Elena approached slowly, placing her palm flat against the cold stone, and felt an answering warmth ripple beneath her skin, the mark on her shoulder blazing briefly with silver light that spilled out to trace along the ancient carvings of the door itself. With a deep grinding groan of stone against stone, the sealed archive finally opened, revealing a chamber untouched by time, shelves of preserved records glowing faintly with the same silver light that had opened the way. The magic recognized you, Damien breathed, awe evident in his voice as they stepped inside together. They searched carefully through the preserved records, Elena's instincts guiding her hands toward a particular shelf, as though drawn by memory she could not consciously access, until she found it. A sealed ledger bearing Voss's own family crest alongside Silvermoon's, detailing in careful damning script an agreement made 17 years earlier, payment promised to Voss's father in exchange for turning a blind eye while conspirators within Silvermoon's own court, working alongside Blackthorn's forces, orchestrated the kingdom's complete destruction. This is it, Elena said, her hands trembling as she read the damning proof at last. This confirms everything, Damien. Voss's family profited directly from my kingdom's fall, and this ledger names the conspirators within Silvermoon's own court who made it possible. Damien leaned closer, reading over her shoulder, his expression darkening further as a particular name near the bottom of the ledger caught his attention, one that made his blood run cold with sudden, horrified understanding. Elena, he said quietly, this names Edmund Bramwell directly, not merely as an informant working for Voss now, but as a conspirator, present at Silvermoon's fall 17 years ago as well. He did not simply betray us recently. He has been part of this treachery since the very beginning. The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow, understanding settling into place with terrible clarity. Edmund Bramwell had not merely grown corrupt in recent years, seduced by Blackthorn's promises. He had helped orchestrate the massacre of her family from the very start, hiding in plain sight within Damien's own court for 17 years, waiting patiently to ensure no surviving heir would ever threaten the conspiracy he had helped build. We need to return to the palace immediately, Elena said, fury and resolve hardening her voice, before he realizes we have found proof of his betrayal, and flees, or worse, moves against Damien's own kingdom directly. Agreed, Damien said grimly, carefully securing the ledger for the journey back. Edmund Bramwell has hidden behind years of trusted service for far too long. It is past time his true nature was revealed before the entire council, and justice finally delivered for everything Silvermoon lost 17 years ago. They left the archive together, the sealed door closing softly behind them once more, and Elena carried the damning ledger against her chest with the same careful reverence she had once carried her mother's silver circlet, understanding now, with unshakable certainty, that she was no longer simply seeking answers about her past. She was preparing to reclaim justice for it, and nothing, not Voss's remaining forces nor Edmund's carefully constructed lies, would stand successfully in her way any longer. They had barely rejoined Colin and the others near the ruined gate, when a lone figure emerged from the tree line beyond, flanked by a handful of remaining guards, his bearing unmistakably that of a man accustomed to command. Alpha Voss himself had come, drawn perhaps by word of his scattered forces' failure, his pale eyes sweeping coldly across the battlefield, before settling on Elena with open, undisguised hatred. So the rumors were true after all, Voss said, his voice carrying easily across the ruined courtyard. Silvermoon's little heir, alive after everything my father arranged to ensure otherwise. His gaze flicked to the ledger clutched in Elena's arms, and something like alarm flickered briefly across his composed features before he mastered it once more. I see you have already found what my scouts could not. Your father's crime is recorded here in his own commissioned hand, Elena said, holding the ledger up despite the danger radiating from the Alpha's stance, along with proof of Edmund Bramwell's involvement from the very beginning. Whatever peace you hope to secure through marriage was never anything but a mask for finishing what your family started 17 years ago. A crime easily buried once more, if that ledger never leaves these ruins, Voss said coldly, his guards shifting into readiness alongside him. You are outnumbered, Voss, Damien said, stepping forward with quiet, dangerous authority. Colin and the remaining guards closing ranks immediately at his side. Your ambush failed. Your scouting party has already surrendered and confessed everything. There is no version of this encounter that ends with that ledger destroyed, and both of us silenced besides. Voss's jaw tightened, calculation flickering behind his pale eyes as he weighed the odds visibly stacking against him. For a long, tense moment, Elena feared he might attack regardless, desperate enough to risk everything, rather than accept the ruin of his family's carefully hidden legacy. But whatever cold pragmatism had guided Voss through years of careful political maneuvering, ultimately won out over reckless fury. This is not finished, he said instead, retreating slowly with his remaining guards, though the promise in his voice carried little of its earlier confidence. You may have proof, Princess, but proof means nothing without the strength to enforce it. Silvermoon fell once already. Do not assume your survival guarantees its rise again. He disappeared back into the tree line with his guards, and Elena released a breath she had not realized she was holding, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly beginning to ebb now that the immediate danger had passed. Damien moved to her side immediately, his hand finding hers and squeezing gently. He is right about one thing, he said quietly. Proof alone will not be enough. We will need to move carefully and quickly once we return, before Voss or Edmund have time to prepare a defense against what we now know. Then let us not waste any more time here, Elena said, though her gaze lingered a moment longer on the ruined towers surrounding them, grief and quiet resolve tangling together, as she took in her family's fallen kingdom one final time, before turning to leave. I have found what I came for. Now it is time to make certain my family's fall was not in vain. Colin gathered the remaining guards and the small handful of surrendered prisoners, and together the weary party began the long journey back toward the palace, the damning ledger secured carefully within Damien's own pack, Elena's resolve hardening with every step away from the ruins that had, despite everything, finally given her the answers she had spent her entire life unknowingly searching for. Edmund Bramwell was already halfway through packing a hidden satchel of gold when Colin's guards broke down his chamber door. He spun around, composure shattering instantly at the sight of armed guards flooding into his private quarters, his carefully maintained mask of loyal service finally cracking to reveal the cornered desperation beneath. This is an outrage, he snapped, though his voice wavered with obvious panic. On what grounds do you dare? On the grounds of treason, Damien said, stepping into the chamber behind his guards, the damning ledger held firmly in his grip. 17 years of treason, Edmund, beginning with your part in Silvermoon's destruction, and continuing through every ambush you arranged against Elena's life these past weeks. Edmund's gaze flicked to the ledger, and whatever hope he had clung to that his crimes might remain buried, finally drained visibly from his face. You do not understand the forces at play, he said, his voice dropping into something almost pleading. Silvermoon's rise threatened balances that took generations to establish. I did what was necessary to preserve peace among the packs, nothing more. You call the slaughter of an entire royal household necessary, Elena said, stepping into the chamber herself, her voice steady despite the fury burning beneath it. You call 17 years of hunting a surviving child preserving peace? Edmund's eyes widened at the sight of her, some final flicker of calculation crossing his features even now, searching perhaps for one last angle of escape. You cannot possibly understand the weight of ruling, girl. Peace built on chaos and rivalry between packs has kept this region stable for decades. Silvermoon's gift threatened to upend all of it, to force unity where careful balance had always served better. Served better for whom? Damien demanded coldly. For men like you and Voss, who profited from war and division while innocent families paid the price. You will answer for this before the full council, Edmund, and I promise you the mercy you receive will reflect the mercy you showed my people's true allies 17 years ago. The guards moved to restrain him, and Edmund's final composure crumbled entirely, his protests dissolving into desperate, incoherent pleading, as he was led away toward the palace dungeons to await formal judgment. Elena watched him go, expecting to feel triumphant satisfaction, but found instead only a quiet, exhausted relief, the weight of 17 years of hidden danger finally beginning to lift from her shoulders. The days that followed passed in a blur of careful diplomacy and formal proceedings. Damien convened the full council, presenting the ledger's damning evidence alongside testimony from the captured Blackthorn scouts, and within a week, word had spread throughout the northern packs that Alpha Voss's family had been directly implicated in Silvermoon's fall, effectively ending whatever remaining influence or alliances his kingdom had maintained among neighboring packs. Isolated and disgraced, Voss withdrew his forces entirely from the border, sending no further threats, at least for the foreseeable future. Edmund Bramwell's trial before the full council was swift and thorough, his confession, once his composure fully broke, filling in details of the conspiracy that had waited 17 years to be spoken aloud. He was stripped of his title and holdings, exiled from Damien's kingdom entirely, a fate Elena found herself grateful for rather than harsher justice, some part of her preferring healing over vengeance now that the truth had finally been secured. With the immediate threats addressed, Damien turned his attention to a matter he had been quietly preparing since their return from Silvermoon's ruins. He called for a formal gathering within the Great Hall, inviting not only his own court but emissaries from allied packs throughout the region, along with every servant within the palace who wished to attend, an unusual gesture that set the entire household buzzing with anticipation. Elena stood at the edge of the Great Hall that evening, dressed not in her old servant's clothes nor even in simple traveling attire, but in a gown of deep silver that Marta had insisted upon, her mother's small circlet resting once more against her dark hair, polished now until it gleamed softly in the candlelight. Margaret, her old friend from the servants' quarters, squeezed her hand tightly before she stepped forward, tears of pride glistening in her eyes. "You look every inch a princess," Margaret whispered. "I still feel like the same girl who used to scrub these floors," Elena admitted, though a small, genuine smile touched her lips, despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "Perhaps you are both," Margaret said gently. "Perhaps that is exactly why they love you already." Damien stood at the head of the Great Hall as Elena approached, his expression radiant with a pride and warmth that needed no words to convey, the assembled court and visiting emissaries falling silent as she made her way steadily forward. 17 years ago, Damien began, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed hall. The kingdom of Silvermoon fell to treachery and greed, its royal bloodline believed entirely extinguished. Tonight, I stand before you to declare that belief false. Elena, daughter of Queen Isolde and rightful heir to Silvermoon's throne, has been confirmed through both ancient bloodmark and irrefutable evidence that has already brought justice to those responsible for her family's destruction. A murmur rippled through the gathered court, though it carried wonder rather than doubt. Many faces Elena recognized from her years of quiet service, now looking upon her with open awe and respect, rather than the polite indifference she had grown accustomed to. "By the ancient laws recognized among all our packs," Damien continued, "a surviving heir, once confirmed, holds rightful claim to re-establish their fallen kingdom, or to forge new alliance as they see fit. Tonight, Elena has chosen the latter path." He turned to face her directly, his eyes warm with a devotion that needed no further explanation. "She has agreed to become not merely an ally to this kingdom, but its Luna, standing beside me as my equal in both crown and heart." Elena felt her breath catch as Damien knelt before her, an unprecedented gesture from a reigning Alpha King, and offered his hand openly before the entire assembled court. "Elena of Silvermoon," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability evident in the gesture. "Will you accept this bond not merely as fate has decreed it, but as I now freely choose it, standing before everyone as proof that I choose you above all else?" Tears blurred Elena's vision as she took his offered hand, memories of scrubbing these very floors, of hiding a mark she never understood, of years spent believing herself unwanted and unremarkable, all dissolving beneath the overwhelming warmth of the moment now unfolding before her. "I accept," she said, her voice carrying clearly, despite the emotion thickening it, "not because the moon demanded it of us, but because I have come to love the man standing before me, and the kingdom he has fought so fiercely to protect, including the girl he once knew only as a quiet servant." The great hall erupted into cheers and applause, and Damien rose to his feet, drawing Elena gently into an embrace that spoke more powerfully than any formal proclamation could have managed. Marta wept openly near the front of the gathered crowd, 17 years of careful, lonely guardianship finally rewarded with a joy she had feared she might never live to witness. Colin stood nearby, a rare, genuine smile breaking across his usually composed features, while Margaret and the other servants cheered loudest of all, celebrating one of their own, rising to a destiny none of them could have imagined possible only weeks earlier. Before the celebrations fully quieted, Serafina approached Elena near the edge of the great hall, her earlier hostility replaced by something more complicated, a careful mixture of caution and grudging respect. Her father's disgrace had stripped away whatever leverage her proposed alliance once carried, and she seemed to understand, standing now before the newly confirmed princess, that the ground beneath her own position had shifted entirely. "I owe you an apology," Serafina said stiffly, though sincerity flickered beneath her careful formality. "I threw a blade at you believing you a servant girl scheming above her station. I did not know I was instead threatening the rightful heir of a kingdom my own father's family helped destroy. You could not have known the truth any more than I did, for most of my life," Elena said gently, surprising herself with how easily forgiveness came, now that the fear and uncertainty of recent weeks had finally settled. "What will you do now, with your father's alliance in ruins?" "Return home, I suppose," Serafina admitted, her composure cracking slightly to reveal genuine uncertainty beneath. "Though I confess I do not know what home even means any longer, given everything my family's name now carries." "Perhaps home is something built rather than simply inherited," Elena offered. "I spent 17 years believing I had none at all, only to discover both a fallen kingdom and a new one, waiting to welcome me regardless. You may find something similar, if you are willing to look for it." Serafina studied her for a long moment, something like genuine gratitude flickering behind her guarded expression, before she offered a small, formal bow and withdrew to make her own preparations for departure, leaving whatever remained of Blackthorn's tangled ambitions behind her entirely. Later, as the gathered court began finally dispersing toward their own chambers, Marta found Elena near the quiet edge of the hall, her weathered eyes bright with unshed tears of joy rather than the fear that had haunted them for so many years. "Your mother would be so proud," Marta said softly, taking Elena's hands in her own, "not merely for the crown you have reclaimed, child, but for the heart you have shown in reclaiming it. Isolde always believed kindness and strength could exist together within the same soul. You have proven her right beyond anything I dared hope to witness. I could not have survived long enough to prove anything, without your courage all those years ago," Elena said, embracing the old healer warmly. "You gave up so much to keep me safe, Marta. I hope you know how deeply that sacrifice is treasured, now and always. Seeing you standing here tonight, safe and loved and finally whole, is more reward than I ever dared to imagine receiving," Marta said, wiping gently at her eyes. "Now go. Spend this evening with the man who clearly cannot stop watching you from across the hall. I have waited 17 years for this happiness. I can certainly wait a little longer to speak with you further tomorrow." Elena laughed softly and made her way back toward Damien, who indeed had been watching her with quiet, patient warmth from across the emptying hall, and together they discussed briefly, before the night fully claimed them, plans already forming to eventually rebuild what remained of Silvermoon, not as a rival kingdom to Damien's own rule, but as a restored home standing proudly alongside it, a living memorial to everyone lost 17 years earlier, and a promise renewed for everyone still to come. Later that evening, once the formal celebrations had quieted and the great hall slowly emptied of well-wishing guests, Elena found herself standing once more beside the palace fountain, where so much of her journey had first begun. Damien's arm settled comfortably around her shoulders, as they watched the moon rise slowly above the palace walls. "Celine told me the choice of what to do with this bond was always mine," Elena said softly, leaning into his warmth. "I am glad I chose this." "As am I," Damien murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "Though I confess some part of me has loved you since long before either of us understood why, since a servant girl stood fearlessly between a rogue wolf and my terrified sister, asking for nothing in return." Elena smiled, tracing the edge of her mother's small circlet where it still rested gently against her hair, feeling, for the first time in her entire life, the full and complete weight of belonging somewhere, to someone, to a legacy finally reclaimed rather than hidden away in fearful secrecy. "Silvermoon may lie in ruins still," she said quietly, "but its heart, I think, has finally found its way home." Above them, the moon climbed higher into the clear night sky, silver light spilling gently across the palace grounds, and somewhere beyond understanding, beyond the reach of ordinary sight, Elena felt certain that her mother, and perhaps the goddess herself, watched over this quiet, hard-won moment of peace with the same fierce love that had guided her safely through every danger she had faced to finally reach it.